Michael.
Kia ora koutou, na me nui kia koutou i hui my name. Welcome to this Environmental Science and Policy Committee workshop on the Land and Water Plan. I'd just like to, na mihi kia Edward, we just start with the karakia.
Kia ora Lloyd, Chairmana, karakia mō te hui nei. Whakarongo ake ai ki te tangi a te manu nei, mā tui a ki runga, tui a ki raro, tui a ki roto, tui a ki waho, tui a i te here tangata, ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, tui i te muka takata i a waiki nui, a waiki roa, i a waiki pamama, tui turu whakamaua tīna, haumi e hui e,
No, kia ora. Just before I forget, also we have an apology from Karen Coates, who's unable to make it here today. She's tied up in hearings in Christchurch, which has gone on for a week or two longer than she had hoped. So that's all good. So we'll just note that. We also have a special welcome today to members of the public. This is a public workshop, and so we welcome you along here today and to observe the proceedings today. Also like to welcome the people on Zoom. I understand Councillor Laws may pop up on Zoom.
Yeah. Yes.
Is he there now?
Yes. Yes.
Correct, Councillor Laws. I welcome the people on Zoom. I'd like to welcome all the staff that are here today who've been involved in the development of the Land and Water Plan. We're very fortunate to have such capable staff, and it's a small team, but it's been a very active team getting us to the stage of our journey with the Land and Water Plan. It's been quite a journey getting to here, the development of the Land and Water Plan. We've got to go back a little bit. Also welcome the councillors in the room. So kia ora to all the councillors in the room. We've got a pretty good turnout, and as I say, we've got Michael's on the Zoom. It's been quite a journey getting to this stage of the development of the Land and Water Plan. It's not been perfect, but then it was never going to be perfect. There's been a lot of reading to be done over the last 3 or so days. There's been significant and well-reasoned feedback from across all sectors of Otago regarding the Land and Water Plan. All the information has been available to the councillors, but as noted, there's been some time pressures and some pressures around the ability to access information prior to this workshop. Given some of those pressures, we're quite happy as we go on. If councillors require more information, we can always park stuff until next week if we need to. The process for this workshop is basically Fer is going to do an introduction and take it from there. Each topic is going to be introduced by the relevant staff member, and they'll involve a brief overview of that topic, the feedback, and where they've gotten to with that. The staff will then have questions. We keep it pretty structured. We want questions. We don't really want stuff that starts with once upon a time, just the questions. The staff and others associated with those questions will be here, and they will answer the questions to the best of their ability, or they'll defer the questions to other members of staff or people who may be in a better position. The question time is not for debate. Question time is for questions. Once everybody's had a go at the questions, we can then debate as a council as to the direction the council would like to give. This hopefully will accumulate in the council giving an indication of a preferred option. These workshops are the platform for us, the councillors, to have our input into the ongoing development of the plan. Will not be the last. This will not be our only or our last opportunity, but the opportunity that we have in front of us here today. It is our role to give the staff clear direction as to what options to carry on their drafting process. This direction needs to be given now ahead of the December 6th meeting, where the directions will be talked about at the council meeting to inform the context of the plan ahead of entering the statutory process. This is our council's and committee's responsibility. We need to take up the challenge now today. It is vital that we ensure everybody gets a chance to have their questions have the questions answered and have their input to the process. So we want to make sure that everybody is comfortable to have their say and is heard. We'll need to keep the workshop well structured so everybody has their say. It is the Regional Council's core role to protect and enhance our environment from the mountains to the sea for the ongoing benefit of our future generations. We need to deal with the target's water quality and quantity now. We cannot delay any longer to meet our statutory requirements. Our environment does not wait on political cycles. We need to do what is right for our environment and our communities, our future, despite the politics of the day. So please, if everybody has respect for each other, we'll have an awesome workshop and get some directions going forward. I'll just, at this stage, just like to pass to Richard.
Thanks, Lloyd. So just as while we're still not in formal decision making, we have had some progress on conflict of interest, which I thought it would be worth updating in a public capacity, given this workshop is public. So in advance of some of the points in time where we will be this table will be in a decision making capacity, we've been engaging with the Office of Auditor General to get a view on managing any interests of councillors around the table. So the decisions came out last week and have been communicated to the individual councillors. But just for the record, I'll run through what those outcomes were. And there is further information on the ORC website and also on the Office of the Auditor General's website with regard to the decisions that have been reached. So Councillor Kelleher has been granted an exemption to participate in discussion and voting on the new plan, other than the matters specific to the Manahira Kia Rohi of the Cluta Mata'ao FMU. Gary has been managing that and didn't apply for an exemption for that specific part of the plan, and will just continue to manage those interests as he has been to date. Councillor McCall granted a declaration to participate in discussions and voting on the new plan, including matters specific to planning for the Lower Clutha Rohi of the Clutha Mata'ao FMU. Councillor Wilson granted a declaration to participate in the discussion and voting of the new plan, including matters specific to the Tairi FMU, and Councillor Noon granted a declaration to participate in discussion and voting on the new plan, including matters that are specific to the Dunedin and Coast FMU. So those are the 4 applications and the results of those applications. I'd like to acknowledge the councillors who took part in that process. I know it was a time-consuming one. There's a lot of information to share, but it was good to get that certainty from the Office of the Auditor General for the process going forward. I'd like to thank Alistair Logan, our external legal counsel, who did a power of work in assisting the process, but also Amanda Verco, who managed the process and did a huge amount of work behind the scenes with both Alistair and the Office of the Auditor General. And obviously acknowledge that office as well, who gave us some great navigation and process advice to get us to the point where we have those 4 decisions and the ability for those councillors involved to be involved in the decision-making process in those areas. So that is the update, and as I say, more information available online for those that might want it.
Thank you, Richard. Henry?
Yeah, that decision didn't refer to any non-financial interests, so I just want to put on the record, even though this is not an official meeting, I have no either private or professional relationship with any staff member or any consultant involved in this process.
Okay. Thank you.
I'd just like to personally thank publicly Alistair Logan, Amanda and Richard for supporting us on that journey. I don't think until you get into that process you realise how hard it is. One side you've got democracy in your electorate expecting you to sit around the table and be heard on their behalf. And it's a really difficult process to be involved in. Staff have been fantastic, and Alistair has shown that local lawyers are as good as any. So it's great to see that process through. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All righty, so we'll hand over to Laurie.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you for your time this morning and next week. I'm just going to be pretty brief this morning so we can get into the guts of it all. The purpose of these 2 workshops is to talk through the feedback on the draft provisions through the community engagement process and also some internal reviews that we've been doing, so that you can provide input and discussion on some of the matters raised that might require revisiting of the overall approach. All those topics that we received a lot of feedback on. We are not going to cover all of the topics or all of the feedback received through these two workshops, but the team has read all of the feedback and is analysing how it should be taken into account in the drafting itself. This analysis will feed into the summary of feedback that we'll be presenting at the council meeting on the 6th of December, and the full draft plan provisions that we will work through on the 14th of December, which will then be entered into the statutory pre-notification consultation process. Before we get started, I just wanted to briefly highlight the most recent engagement process. So as you know, across September and October, we hosted 10 in-person drop-in sessions across the region, plus 2 public online sessions and 4 targeted stakeholder briefings. The stakeholder briefings were for the farming and horticulture sector, the forestry sector, territorial authorities and environmental interest groups. The draft material, which was voluminous, is that the word, was online from the 9th of September, and the feedback in total we received from about 570 individuals or organisations, which I think is an excellent result. This slide and the next one just shows the topics that we're covering today, and they're also listed in table 1 on page 3 of the introductory paper. We worked through these in a systematic way, as Lloyd said, with Tom, Felicity and myself providing the overview and others in the team on hand or online to help answer questions. We've provided options for those topics where we need some guidance about which ones to work up into draft provisions, and we'll be covering those first to make sure that we get sufficient time for them. We haven't included preferred options, as all of the options we've included could be workable. So it's for you to provide guidance to us about which you'd prefer to include in that pre-notification consultation version of the plan. So those are the first topics. The topics on this slide are those that there was quite a bit of attention, but we're not suggesting significant changes to the drafted provisions, other than obviously those needed for clarity and just tidying up things. For these, we're generally wanting to confirm you're still comfortable with the previous direction that you've given us. And then these topics, these are the topics for next week. We'll be sending a second table around to assist with next week's discussion. We have allocated some time at the end for you to raise any additional topics that you'd like us to cover next week, but I'll be noting down things as we go if things come up during the discussion. But I would just kind of note that for those additional topics, we might not be able to provide it in the same table. It might be sort of just because of the time constraints that we've got here. And that was all I was going to say. So I think we will get started, and I'll hand over to Tom. Oh, Felicity. Sorry. Seamless.
Yes, so the first topic on the list today is the consent requirement for suction dredge mining, which received a lot of attention in the submissions that we received, as well as in the media. So the proposal in the land and water plan at the moment is that all suction dredge mining will require consent regardless of its size, scale or location, which is a change from the water plan approach of having a permitted activity rule. The reason for that is due to the direction in the NPS FM about avoiding the loss of river values. The problem with permitted activities is that they are more difficult to monitor, and there is a bit of a lack of information about where these activities are happening, the scale of them, and the effects that they might have had on the environment. So the feedback was mixed. There was some support for the approach proposed, but also quite a lot of opposition. As I've said, the impacts of the activities aren't monitored at the moment because they're permitted activities largely, and there's some uncertainty about how they're impacting the environment. There is enough information to know that they can have adverse effects on benthic communities in riverbeds, and they can trap fish in pipes. So we've put forward three options here. The first is to maintain the consenting approach, which allows each activity to be considered on a site-specific basis, but does come with additional cost for people wanting to undertake the activity. Option 2 is to return to a permitted activity rule, but to reduce the scope of the current rule doesn't have a limit on the size of the area that can be mined. And so option 2 is to include that type of restriction on the extent. Option 3 is also a permitted activity rule, but to restrict where the activity can occur with consent required in some particular locations that we consider would be more sensitive, such as the habitats of threatened species and water bodies that have been identified as having outstanding ecological values. So that's an overview. Happy to take questions, and the main topical for this topic is Danielle. She's online with us, so happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Felicity. So do you have questions? Okay.
Thank you. And thank you for using your parameters or the toolbox of size, scale, and location, because those are what effectively become your tools, and how to reduce the risk is really what we're trying to do in this process. And it's in that mindset I've looked at all of these topics as we go through. And the report was helpful in that it talked about the size of the suction head, I think, and certainly talked about locations. It occurs to me reading this that, you know, there's an application I think currently at the moment for a dredge, which is no one would think it couldn't happen without consent. And so it's the size and scale, and I don't know enough about the size and scale, but I know a lot of people do this as a hobby activity with a relatively small nozzle. And am I correct in reading the advice that the small hobby ones of, and I can't remember the diameter size, would have been considered to be low risk?
Yes, so the existing water plan rule, it's a permitted activity, but one of the conditions is that the size of the nozzle is restricted to 150 millimetres or less. So that means that it's capturing those smaller scale activities, not the larger commercial ones that require consent.
Okay, and so you've tested that against what the market is for those hobbyists? I don't know. And
the feedback from engagement is that works for people, and they want to retain that type of scale differentiation, which is included in options 2 and 3 as well. It wouldn't be only the locational and extent.
Yeah.
controls. Yeah.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Understanding the process, because I think looking at the risk matrix is a really helpful way of doing it.
We have Councillor Laws, welcome online, then we'll have Brian.
Thank you. What's the estimated number of suction dredging operations currently in Otago? That's the first question. And the second question is, are they all connected, including the hobbyists, with seeking precious metals?
Sorry, through the chair, I don't know if we can answer that, Councillor Laws, because of the permitted activity framework. So we have no visibility over how many and who do it. We can find out how many have consents, but I don't have that number with me, and I can't tell you what they're looking for, but through the consent process we could
minerals.
we could
I think
do
it
that.
might be almost exclusively gold.
Gold,
Yeah.
would be
Well, I
the-
would have thought, I would have thought there must be an estimated number, surely, of how many people are conducting dredging operations, so we know when we bring in this rule, how many people we're likely to affect in the operations that we will
We could
affect as well.
Sorry.
Hang
excuse
on,
me.
hang on, we're just getting into debate now. At the end of the day, the question's been answered.
No, it's just a question. Why haven't we got them? Why
Oh, we don't
why are there no estimates of something that we're bringing a rule in on?
What we could do is get information about who's got the rights to mine, and particular how many, I can't remember what they're called, through the mining rights permits through MB. So we could at least do that, and we will do that.
So that's a follow-up that will come back with some information around mining permits, etc.
Just a point of
Hang on,
clarification.
hang on. Yeah, on that particular.
Yeah, on that
point,
particular point. So these people that are suction dredging have had to have a mining permit.
Yes.
So that's their control. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you. Have you got any, are you good there, Michael? Thank you.
Yes,
Right.
thanks. That's the question I asked.
Thank you.
Quick
Brian?
one, like, is there an issue around the visibility of a permitted activity? Could we, for example, continue with a certain amount of permitted activity as is proposed in a number of the options, but say we're going to have more visibility around it in terms of monitoring, or is there fundamentally an issue that you never really know because there's no protocol?
It's very difficult to know with permitted activities when they're occurring and where. Sometimes you have conditions on permitted activities that require people to alert the council
Yes.
of what they're going to do and when. But if they don't, it's difficult for the council to know whether they have failed to comply with that condition. You know, if someone doesn't notify the council and continues to go out and do their activity, the council doesn't know unless someone complains about it.
Okay, so you're basically saying the visibility will always be an issue of permitted activities.
That's right.
And through the chair, if I may, then, so really, in terms of preferred option, the preferred option needs to be in a situation where the impact is less than minor, yeah? So is it best handled through reducing the scope or through the locality option 2 or option 3? Surely it's the scope so that you know it's less than minor in terms of option 2.
It's possibly both. And that's also an option, is to combine those two controls. So
Yeah.
a restriction on the extent of
Yeah.
like the total area that you can cover, but also, you know, the total area, the sensitivity of that area is really important. And so you would probably want to do a bit of both.
Cool. And finally, I'm surprised, Mr. Chair, that there's not a recommended option. Why isn't there a recommended
So
option?
as Fleur mentioned at the start, staff believe all options will comply with the NPS freshwater, and so it's for you to make a direction.
Thank you. Thank
Make
you.
them all work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Andrew?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. With reference to option 3, the process of identifying outstanding water bodies and sensitive water bodies, how aligned is that with the notification of the land and water plan?
So the proposed plan already contains mapping of habitats of threatened species, and it already contains mapping of potential outstanding water bodies, including those with ecological value.
Yeah.
So those areas are defined, and mapped.
Potential. So does that mean
Yes.
that's a policy position, or potential is still evolving?
It's still evolving because, and we'll discuss this later, but we've received quite a lot of feedback about the particular descriptions of some of the outstanding water bodies. And so we are going through and checking whether that changes the assessment that was undertaken of that particular water body. So there is a list, but we are going back and check where people have raised additional information or suggested that it might not be accurate. We are checking that to make sure that the assessment's been done correctly.
So it's likely that governance would see that complete list prior to notification.
Yes, it's in the plan. Yeah.
Not likely definite.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you, Andrew. We have,
It's on the website now as well.
But
we have Kevin and then Ellen.
Yeah, just to follow up on that same line is, so when I apply for a mining permit, are MPI issuing them within sensitive water bodies?
I don't think we can really comment on their process.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a
The-
whole separate process. that
Yeah,
they
the kinds of things
run.
that they consider are not about the environment. So they're thinking about, I can't even think of.
The economic and extractive values.
So
of
we would look at the environmental side of it, which comes under our core regional council functions, which is what would happen through the consent process or the permitted activity pathway. But MB are looking, as I've said, about different things, that mining right.
Right, so just to follow, so that mining right could be issued and we could trump that with it being in a sense of, we could prevent it from happening because it's in what we're going to call a sense of.
Well, I mean, they could find a different method that doesn't involve the same activity type to make use of that mining right. I mean, I don't know if the technology is there, but it's,
Yeah.
yeah, they are separate processes.
Thank you. You good there, Kevin?
Oh, yeah, I've got a heap more when I just.
You can just go, just keep, just questions, yeah.
Yeah, so in the recommendations or the options we have there, but our science recommendation on page, I can't quite get the page on this, but under our science, our recommendation is actually adopt the existing rule 13.5.1.17, but add a couple of additional things around the protection of glexids, which and then putting a maximum 30 square meters per day. So how is that covered in those?
So
How would I cover that
the
there?
30 square meters is option 2. So that's the extent of the activity. That's
Yeah.
how much speed you can mine. And option 3 is about restricting where it can occur, and particularly those galaxid habitats. So the threatened species mapping includes a lot of galaxid habitat, most of it. And the outstanding water bodies with ecological values are often also galaxid habitats. So that would be the 2 controls coming
Yeah.
from the science report.
Yeah.
So earlier Felicity mentioned we could combine option 2 and 3, which would
Yeah.
address completely that
Yeah.
point that you've made, Councillor
Yeah.
Malcolm.
And it just seems, technology would possibly allow me to mine it differently, so I could come from underneath, grab it and not disturb the water. But it seems to me that we have, between the 2 groups, that someone's not controlling that stuff in sensitive areas. If you know what I mean, although you can only mine the gold where the gold is, you can't mine it anywhere else. But environmentally, yeah.
I mean, the existing water plan does prevent, it's not permitted to suction dredge mine in particular water bodies.
Yeah.
And so but that's been in the plan for 20 odd years, and it's not necessarily the most up to date, considering the work that's been done more recently on galaxid habitats and other threatened species. So it's not a dissimilar approach to what's happening now. It's just that we have more information and there are likely more areas where you probably wouldn't permit it.
So if it wasn't, if it was a permitted activity and it wasn't, say, permitted in a certain water body, I could apply for consent to go there. Whether I get one or not, but I mean, I could apply for a consent with technologies and whatever. I could still, it actually doesn't rule them out.
That's right.
It just,
It just means that the council's got more of an oversight and the ability to impose conditions on how the activity is undertaken.
Yeah. And is it possible to is it possible to and part of our rule to put a rule in there that NPI advises us of where they put these out? I mean, that just seems nutty that we don't. That's all right. We'll leave that one.
Thanks, Kevin. Right.
Look, it's an interesting point because, I'm sorry, this is such a dredging as one technology, digging out and you with your old shovel and your pick and your using your gold pan as another, and we haven't got any rules, so that would be permitted. So when again we look at the toolbox, that is less destructive or is seen as less risk because you didn't need either a lot of people to do the same quantum of area, and it's just not as productive. Is it possible that there is a scale with suction dredges that should or could be considered low risk if they're smaller than, say, 150, and that could go into those areas? Because I appreciate it's a blunt tool potentially to say just don't go into this area, but they may be actually less destructive than someone panning alternatively. And some of those more, the water goes right through them, and I don't know if the fish can go right through them or not. But I'm just testing that limit.
And I think that's something that, as Councillor Malcolm was saying, if you are operating in those areas and therefore you need a consent, it's not necessarily but you can't get that consent.
Yeah.
And it might be those types of controls on the size of the suction dredge and particular areas, you know, there might be particular spawning habitats or particular times of the year where you can't go there, but other times of the year that you can. And that's the kind of thing that's easier to, when you're getting into that level of site-specific detail, it's easier to address through a consent process than a permitted activity rule that has to be really certain.
Yeah.
Or just taking that further, I mean, if you had the clear months where this is for glaxids, don't suction dredge in these months and otherwise it's permitted, that would be certainly an easier process. Potentially, I think so.
It's an option, yeah. Helen?
Yeah, thank you. Look, this has largely been answered in the previous discussion from what Kevin had raised, but I guess I just wanted to check in that recommendation in that science report about avoiding certain periods when, in fish spawning periods, those time restrictions could also be included in that option 3 there.
Yes.
Thank you, Alan. Tim?
Can I just ask you to confirm that the highest level of environmental protection is the combination of options 2 and 3?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Any other questions? If not, we can have a bit of a cordial about where we think we're landing. Any comments?
Yes.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Laws. You do have your hand up. Yep, thank you.
Well, it's just that I find it difficult to know what the problem is we're trying to solve if we don't have the basic data of what number of operations are out there and what potential effect they're having on the environment. So, I mean, does it strike nobody else as a little odd that we're trying to create a rule for a problem that we don't know anything about? And I would have thought this was, to be perfectly honest with you, Staff Information 101. What's the problem? What's the likely number of people who are involved in this operation? What are the potential effects upon the environment? What are the actual effects upon the environment? We've been asked to bring in a rule without being able to answer any of those questions. Doesn't seem very good policy making to me.
So, Michael, basically what you're saying is that you prefer the status quo option?
No, I'm saying I'd like to have a lot more information before you make a decision. I mean, I asked a question at the start of this. What's the estimated number of operations in Otago? We don't have the answer to that question. What's the problem you're trying to solve?
Thank you.
Excuse me, who said that?
I don't know.
God.
We don't know.
So if you're trying to protect the fish, is that what somebody just said? Are they currently under threat? Is there an obvious threat that they are under? Have we done the statistics to do with that? What's the estimated number of people who get themselves involved in such as dredge mining? Why don't we have that information now, prior to us making a decision?
Thank you, Michael. We'll take those points for correction.
We have heard that we have currently got consented takes for suction dredging in Otago, and we've been monitoring those consents, so we do have information that sits behind this. I think that the option 2 and 3 combo, 2 and 3 combo, yep, they're the ones. Just double checking that that's the right numbering, yep, for the locality and the sensitivity and the scale, both of those together makes the most sense. And yeah, I mean, intuitively vacuum cleaning essentially the bottom of the stream of a bed as well, where there's sensitive species on a large scale, you would be wanting to control that, yeah.
Thank you. I think I've got Brian and Kate. No, Brian and then Elliot. And then
Cool. I support what Councillor Robinson's just said. You know, I think for where the impact on the environment is less than minor, you know, a person should be able to do what they need to do. And it's also, it's all about that, you know, and as Gretchen said, there is some work in terms of the environmental impact on some of the consented activities. So but we also need to be conservative, you know, where we don't have information, it doesn't mean we just carry on, because we know we've got sediment issues and all this type of stuff. So a mix of option 2 and 3, the small guy can do their stuff as long as the impact's less than minor. And so that's where the scope and the location need to ensure that, and we need to be conservative while enabling the small activity to occur on a permitted basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Elliot, can we have Gary?
Yeah, talks about what Richard and Brian have said. I'd just add also when to where in option 3 as well, you know, at that time of year kind of options, if there are times of year that, you know, doing that extraction would have more significant impacts on those kind of fish. And yeah, having those options 2 and 3, as Brian said, means those less than properly commercial scales can be directed to doing it at times and places and scales that won't have massive impacts, and everyone else has to go through the proper consent process.
Thanks, Elliot. We have Gary and then Andrew.
Thank you. This is a recreational activity at a very small scale. We'll never have detail on it because if you know gold miners, the one thing they do not tell you
Fishermen.
is where they are getting good gold. But it is a very, very popular activity, and it is at a very small scale. In my mind, it should remain a permitted activity at the scale that it's at. If we know of certain areas, you know, we have rivers that are proposed for fish screens, for protection of galaxids and other aqualife, then of course we may have some specific areas we should be looking to say excluded from here. It may be that within some waterways, we may be okay to exclude a certain part of a waterway and include another part. But because it is such a minor activity that I'm very keen to see it remain as a permitted activity.
Thank you, Gary. We have Andrew and then Edward.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. 2004, I think the water plan was notified, and this activity was permitted at that point in time. So, you know, we've moved on from that. We're nearly, 20 years down the track. So I can understand the importance of protecting and ensuring those sensitive and outstanding water bodies are recognised. So option 3 would be my pick, but I'm mindful that if we were presented with a paper 30 June 2024 that said every water body and throughout Otago was either sensitive or outstanding, I would want to reserve my judgment on this. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Edward, then Alan.
Yes, kia ora. I think there was a management plan for suction dredging that was eventually incorporated into regional plan water. And I was always aware that this made that the extent of permitted activity across a large number of waterways in Otago was probably a bit liberal. And I think we've learnt over the time since then that that is probably the case. In fact, I used to go out with the ORC staff inspecting mining activities. And yes, we found mining activities that didn't have consents. In those days, these were in the 90s. But look, I think it's a mix of 2 and 3. I think there'll be cases where there are consents required, extent definitely controlled. And it's about the benthic values that I'm concerned about. Habitat, fishery, those things that probably haven't totally been weighted in the current permitted activity.
Thank you, Edward. We have Alan and then Kate.
Thanks. The science report we've referred to indicates that we do have some information about this activity. Moving from to making this a permitted activity with those conditions also indicates that we are taking account of that community feedback we've received. So it seems to me that we've heard that options 2 and 3 somehow together would do the job well.
Thank you, Alan. We have Kate.
Look, I'm happy with option 2 and 3 being a mix, but I go back to what I think we need to do is look at all of the tools being used and the risks that go with them and highlight when those risks are there at not a too deep a level, but understanding that. So for me, the time of the year may be more important than, and the scale may be the least important. And the scale, I'm yet to understand quite the 30 metres squared. I just don't know how, if that's 1 hour's work or 10 hours work, and without understanding that. But when I've looked up nozzles and suction dredges, understanding that an investment of 10 million will require a consent because it's bigger generally than the 150 that's been proposed. And yeah, I think that you're getting into a balance of if it's a serious hobby or whether it's a gentle hobby. And those are important things to understand. I may have those measures incorrect, but I think there's something like that. So I just don't understand the scale question that you posed because I don't know if that's 1 hour's work or 10 hours work, and that I just want to understand in that process. I just encourage us to consider how we do this using toolbox scale.
Thank you, Kate. We have 3 that haven't said, 3 that haven't debated yet.
Not debating.
So we're all happy.
Oh, yeah, I'll just say I'm happy with that 2 and 3, but I just want to reiterate, Kate, that I know exactly how big 30 square metres is. But, and
can you use that measure out?
Yeah. Well, this room's 10 metres long, so it's 3 metres from there, and 3 metres about just past Ellen's feet. So that's and I don't understand that as a whether that is I travel up from wherever I am and I get 20 minutes work or I get a day's outing. And when I read that, I'm really quite balanced with it. Like the science report and especially the science report is it's quite comfortable that the current activity is not, providing we're outside of those fishing times, out of the fish collected spawning times, it's not over onerous. So that would be that understanding is the part of.
Thanks, Kevin. Tom?
Yeah, look, I'm just I'm happy with the combination of 2 and 3. That's all I want to say.
Awesome. Nixon?
No, I'm all right, thank you.
Lloyd? No, I think there were some very good submissions on this particular one, and I thought there were some really detailed submissions with some really good ideas in them. And it seems to me most ideas have been picked up and they flow through into options 2 and 3 in a combo. So I'm very comfortable at that stage as well. So it seems to me like there's really pretty clear consensus around 2 and 3 combo. Can we? Is anybody happy there?
I'm just wondering if it's like assumed that where also includes when in option 3. You know,
Yes, the time.
Yeah, time of year. As
Timing,
well.
yeah.
Time of year is
But there's a note that we think about timing. Okay, so I think, do we need a show of hands or anything? Let's move on. I think that's pretty straight.
Good discussion.
So that's really good debate. Thanks, guys. It's all went really well, and respect everybody's opinions, which is really good. So we'll move on to item number 2 on the agenda, which is beds of lakes and rivers, and more specifically gravel extraction.
Yes, so the next topic in relation to beds is permitted activity volume limit for gravel extraction. At the moment, the regional water plan at the moment permits 20 cubic metres per month, and under the draft land and water plan, there was a proposal to limit that quite significantly down to 5 cubic metres per year, because there is a lack of information about the acceptable, how much gravel it is appropriate to extract from water bodies. Discretionary resource consent would be required for extractions above that limit. And this is a bit of a holding pattern at the moment because there's a longer term work program in the hazards and engineering space for more specific site-specific management of gravel and morphology of rivers. So this would be a conservative temporary situation until that longer work program starts to come into force with a code of practice and gravel management strategy. The feedback that came through the survey responses was that the 5 cubic metres a year is far too low and that the permitted threshold should be higher. There were suggestions that the volume should be tailored to specific rivers or sites. There was support for restrictions on ensuring that extractions happen outside spawning seasons, and requests for the rules to be more lenient where the extraction relates to protecting structures or clearing build-up for flood management purposes. So the options up there are to retain the proposed approach, but we have sought additional advice from ORC's ecologists, and so option 2 there is to increase the limit to 20 cubic metres a year, in combination with other conditions that we were proposing about spawning season restrictions and things like that. Option 3 is to provide a straightforward consenting pathway for larger extractions, provided that they comply with a code of practice, but that code of practice hasn't yet been developed, so there would be more work to do to implement that option before notification.
Awesome, thank you, Felicity. So we'll have questions. So we have, great.
So if I went to the toolbox again, using scale, size, location, which is what some of the submissions talked about, I don't think we've used them quite as effectively in considering what the answers could be here and the risks. So if I'm on the Pomahaka, which is quite a substantial river and certainly has a substantial amount of gravel, subject to certain location limits maybe, the risk would be less than if I'm in a creek. I mean, and it's the number of farms, I mean, the size of your farm as well. And this just seems really lacking any nuance. It's not necessarily easy. I know we're working on an existing one of 5 of 20 metres, but we seem to have constrained ourselves to the existing plan method without looking at the size and scale and the potential, what we may have learned in the last 20 odd years about individual rivers. And so my question is it too difficult to use a more nuanced and more toolbox? I mean, you've been asked to consider that in the submissions. Why is it so difficult to consider the size of the property and the size of the river and the size or the location of that river and it's as a more nuanced rule, or is it one that's better dealt within a farm plan, freshwater farm plan potentially?
I think Danny might be best placed to answer this one.
Yeah, I can jump in there if you like, Felicity. So we have kind of considered the option of having those more kind of river specific type limits. Unfortunately, we just don't have the information right now to be able to put together some useful volume limits for those different types of rivers, but it is something that I think we'd be aiming towards with that kind of longer term project plan for gravel management.
If I read things on the Tairi River or on the Pomahaka, where we've actively in the last 10 years put in that gravel extraction is something that we would be looking into one day, there must be rivers that we do know that can happen.
Yep.
Or yeah, surely.
Question.
Yeah, well, the question is, I appreciate there may be some areas we don't understand, but there must be some areas we've put it out there over the last 10 years in things like the Kakanui, in the Tairi, in the Pomahaka. The question is, couldn't we, where we know we have got reports that suggest that we should be allowing it, shouldn't we, or is the farm plan the option to do that?
It's something we can absolutely look at for those rivers where there has been kind of communication about there being an issue. It's something we can raise with science and see whether they might be comfortable increasing that number. In terms of freshwater farm plans, given, I guess, kind of what freshwater farm plans are designed to be managing and the types of people that would be putting them together and certifying and auditing them, we're not quite sure yet whether those people would also have the skills to be able to confirm whether a higher or lower amount of gravel would be appropriate for that specific site.
Yeah, that's a good point, because removing gravel obviously has an impact on flood flows and the way that a river copes with a flood. And if you have certifiers who are focused more on understanding farming land uses and practices that happen on land, they may not be appropriately qualified to be making decisions on.
But these people can be freshwater, they're freshwater
yeah.
farm plans, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, so basically the answer to the question is that they're not overly confident around whether the people that are going to be certifying farm plans have the ability to do it for gravel extraction.
Can I
We'll
just-
move on, thanks.
Oh, I just want to, sorry, there was a question there, is,
No, we're moving on. Elliot, maybe?
I was just wondering what level of comfort the team have that, like, you know, because obviously there is a bit of a lack of information in this space, and I'm wondering what level of comfort we have with going, you know, above 5 meters squared per year unconsented, and how that might comply with Te Mana Te Wai under, you know.
Yeah, so the ecological advice received is that 20 cubic meters, there's a comfort that you could do 20 cubic meters per year without having those types of adverse impacts.
With certain conditions.
Yeah, with other conditions, and there are lots of other conditions as well.
Thanks, Elliot. We have Brian, then Andrew.
So just some quick ones. Did I mishear? Did you say the current situation is 5 cubes per month?
The current water plan permits 20 cubic meters per month.
Okay, oh, thank you.
Good question.
You've got option 2 and option 3. You know, when I read that, this is as if it's option 2 or option 3, but surely don't they complement each other? You know,
I think they could, much like the last situation,
Yeah.
yes, I think 2 and 3 could work together.
cool, thank you. And the final one, the conversation's been about farm plans, you know, could you use farm plans? But isn't the legal status of a farm plan different? Like in a farm plan, do you just have to have regard to a particular role as opposed to actually do the role?
Joe, we might.
Yeah,
back to you.
so I've just been looking it up, and the purpose of a farm plan is relating to farming and the effect of farming on freshwater and freshwater ecosystems. So it is set up for farming and those farming based activities. So it is pretty clear about what comes under the remit of a freshwater farm plan.
Yeah, but just to answer specifically my question, is there a different legal status between the farm plan and the land and water plan? And the farm plan just has to give regard to certain expectations as opposed to 100% follow them, if I misinterpreted that.
Yeah, so they're under two separate bits of legislation, but there's still the legal requirement to have a freshwater farm plan. And then under the land and water plan, it sets out our legal requirements or to have a consent or not have a consent.
But Kate has suggested you could manage this potentially through a farm plan. Is that a different?
Yeah,
legal
my understanding of the
standard?
legislation is that the freshwater farm plans are specific to farming activities and the effect of farming itself. And I don't think gravel extraction is farming, but it is certainly something that we can investigate further.
I don't think a farm plan would apply to the bed of a river
No,
either,
that's
because
my
it generally applies to the farm, the area of land that's being farmed, not necessarily a water body where the bed is not owned by the.
Yeah, but with respect, you haven't answered, but you know.
So Brian, the short, I think what you're asking, a farm plan, if there is a pathway provided in the land and water plan, it can be used as a tool to undertake the activity, but it's got to be explicitly included in the land and water plan that a farm plan pathway can be used.
Okay, you'll include that in the.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. We have Andrew, Alan, Michael, Kevin.
Tempted to say something about farm plans. I might as well. Just for Brian's benefit, these are certified and audited, have infringement notices and penalties and fines. So, but anyway, the question was,
Legal status.
was about protecting structures, particularly TA's structures. Felicity won't be surprised to ask this question again. We've talked about what is significant in terms of structures, and we're told that nationally and regionally significant structures are included. And we are aware that, I'm not sure whether the definition of significant infrastructure has been clearly defined. What I'm concerned about is that where TAs have paid for bridges, culverts, roads, etc., that they all fall into the commentary that sits around a rule that helps to allow in a flood situation or a reason to remove gravel from in and around a bridge, for example, that those activities can occur without a lengthy consenting process. So I suppose I want a reassurance that local infrastructure, such as what I've mentioned, and I could probably also throw in power poles as well, are they considered lumped in with national and regionally significant infrastructure?
Yeah, I can speak to that one. So there's not a rule specific for that type of extraction, but the policy direction which would support consent applications kind of groups that local transport infrastructure in with the protection of nationally and regionally infrastructure to try and provide a more enabling consent pathway for those types of extractions.
Okay, can we just follow that up, Mr. Chair?
Good question.
In terms of significance, is it in relation to, and I'm talking about infrastructure here, is it in relation to whether it has an impact nationally or regionally, or does it, is it based on the benefit to the region in terms of, let's say it's one road leading into a particular remote area, for example, and there might be 10 or 15 dairy farms there, so the road is actually critical for those activities carried out. See where I'm coming from? Maybe not.
Yeah, absolutely. So the reference right now is to both those kind of high level nationally and regionally significant infrastructure aspects, but it also includes local transport infrastructure with the intention that that would cover those kind of smaller roads, accessing remote places, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Thanks, thank you. We try and keep our questions relatively short, we'll only get halfway through. That's good discussions. I have Helen, then Michael, and then Tim, and then
Me, maybe?
Look, the science report I've been looking at notes a risk to nesting birds at certain times of year. How do any of those options deal with that risk?
So, as far as I'm aware, there is a condition on the existing permit, well, on the proposed rule about not disturbing the habitats of roosting birds. I'm not aware that those are always matched though, and they change, depending on where the birds choose to go.
So amongst the permitted whatever volume that is, there is that condition already written in, just we
Yes,
don't
so
have a great deal of information about that.
that's right. So the gravel, the volume threshold is the part that has received the most feedback, but there are other conditions on the activity, such as not disturbing roosting areas, not occurring in a drinking water protection zone, or the habitat of a threatened species. So there are other conditions as well. It's really just the volume in terms of that scale that's been controversial.
Okay, thank you.
thank you. We have Michael, Kevin, Alexa, Tim, Gretchen. So Michael, you're next.
Thank you. Sorry, I just need to understand. Do you need permission for gravel extraction, no matter whether it is a permitted activity, a gravel authorization, or a resource consent? So we're going to put them in our plan, but if it's a PA and it's a small volume, would you still need some form of authorization to do so, to extract that gravel?
No.
You do in Canterbury Regional Council.
Yes, and in Southland as well. And that is
So why not us?
So that gravel authorisation process is what's in development at the moment for the longer term gravel strategy. The intent is to have a gravel strategy that more clearly identifies areas where there is aggradation of gravel resources and where more needs to be taken for flood management purposes. And that, like in Canterbury, that would inform the process of a gravel authorisation so that the council is receiving information about where those extractions are happening.
So let me get this right. Are you saying that Canterbury and Southland are ahead of us on this issue? We're making up this rule now, but we've still got further work to do down this area. Is that what I've just heard you say?
It's correct that Canterbury and Southland have a more site-specific approach that they are implementing at the moment, and that ORC is in the process of getting their information and strategies to a point where they can adopt a similar approach.
So, question, obvious one, do we wait until we do the gravel strategy, or is this just an interim step that you're proposing today?
So Councillor Laws, throughout this process, through the issues and options papers that you have had, you've had those options, and the one you've provided is not to wait to develop slightly different rules, which is why you've got these in front of you today. So all of that was outlined over the last 12 months in the various
right,
that you've had.
but the option still exists that we could wait.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. Okay, that's just what I'm asking. Thank you.
Kevin, then Alexa.
Yeah, I'd probably go back to where are the obvious issues that the current practice is causing harm, and have we met that, and do we know that?
So I think there are concerns that because the threshold at the moment is so high, there is a lack of cumulative consideration of the cumulative impacts. So if one person is taking 20 cubic meters a month by their property, what impact does that have downstream for people? And that's the part that is a concern, I think, to the engineering team, because they're trying to manage the flood capacity of the entire catchment. And it's quite difficult if you've got large piecemeal activities happening that change the way that the river moves and the way that the flows come through the river in high flows.
If you cast your mind back quite some time, you'll recall us saying that one of the challenges with the existing plan is it is so permissive that we don't have a lot of visibility over a lot of things. And so this is two topics you've had today where some of the challenges we have is activities are going on that we just don't have good visibility over.
Right, yet we can't, we're not pinpointing exact places where it has created an issue though. We think there's an issue. I'm just sort of reading the signs of what we think there's an issue, and there possibly is an issue, but we actually haven't pinpointed those as yet.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Yeah,
and I think that was the reason we wanted an interim strategy until the long-term process was developed.
Yeah,
was to get some conservative control over that issue until we had good clarity going forward.
Yeah. So if I want more than 20, so you're going to cut me back to 20 cubic meters a year, then historically, if I'm doing all the actions for my farm plan, which is to keep my tracks gravelled and sediment, no sediment running off them. So can I get more if the river's right to get more?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, through a consent.
Through a consent.
Yep,
Through a consent. Yep.
And just to follow on from the Southland example, they do require consent for gravel extractions so that they can provide that authorisation from their engineering team.
Yeah.
That the volume that's being extracted and the place that it's being extracted from, it's fine to take that volume. That's the purpose of, but they need a consent because otherwise there's no way to require those people to be checking in with council first.
Yeah. So this is probably a reasonably important one to what I'm thinking is, so we've got Canterbury, we've got Southland with current codes of practice now. So how long is it going, how long will it be, how long is it intended for us to take to develop a code of practice?
So I think there's a lot of good work that's been done by the engineering team already to get their global consent for their river management operations, and there is enough information, I think, to put together a code of practice relatively quickly. But a longer term gravel management strategy involves morphology strategies of investigations of particular rivers. And so that's the thing that will take longer. Danny, you might have a better idea than me about the code of practice development.
Yeah, I think what you said is right. The global consent gets us a fair way there in terms of the types of information that would be including in a code of practice. But I can't speak for the Rivers team in terms of timing for that code of practice being put together.
We have Alexa and Tim.
All mine's mostly been answered, but I'm wondering if a combo between 2 and 3 would actually solve the blunt tool issue that we've got. So that because as it sits, we don't consider the different rivers, the different types of rivers, the different seasons, the different breeding requirements, spawning requirements, and also the difference between taking something commercially or clearing away from a ridge or any other human activity that's threatened. Do you think so? The question is, would option 2 and 3, a combination of those, solve those issues?
I think so.
Make it a finer.
Yeah, I mean, there's generally in the community, there's an opposition to getting consents. So I think wherever, even if you combine options 2 and 3, there's a point at which a permitted activity becomes an activity that requires consent. And I think that trigger point is always going to be controversial.
But our feedback's telling us 20 meters, 20 cubes is probably about right, isn't it?
I think that's certainly the science advice, is that permitted volume could go up to 20. And then you'd be consented after that.
And the 20 would come with those conditions?
With the additional conditions on restricting in sensitive areas, and things like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Alexa, we have Tim and then Gretchen.
It's just a clarification question around the current situation. We've got a 5 cubic metre permitted activity at the moment, but you also mentioned that there's a 20 metre monthly one as well. Can you clarify that?
So the existing water plan that we're replacing has a permitted activity of 20 cubic metres per month. What we have proposed in the consultation for the land and water plan was the 5 cubic metres per year. And the feedback is that that's too, you're going from something that's very permissive to very restrictive, and maybe we need to be more in the middle.
Okay, so the next question is there actually a need to increase it to 20 cubic metres? Are we seeing a need? Are people actually, are farmers actually saying that's what they want?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Tim, Gretchen.
The in combination with other conditions part about getting the 20 cubic metres a year, I've heard talk of the sensitivity of species and the timing of the year as potentially what some of those conditions might be. But just thinking about what 20 cubic metres looks like, this is 10 metres, we measured before for some reason. You would have twice that length for 20 metres, and a stream that was potentially this wide, so about 1 metre, dug down to 1 metre depth, potentially to occur in one hit, could occur or couldn't occur. So do we take into account the ability of the stream to generate gravel and its current morphology, so what it sort of looks like in these other conditions, because you could actually have quite an impact with a 20 cubic metre extraction, and you could basically achieve clearing out of a stream, which people like to do as well, through this.
Is there a question there?
The question is, what are the other conditions? I did ask it, does it take into account the morphology or the ability of the stream to generate gravel?
Great question, and something that we have considered when setting that volume limit is that while the volume is the upper limit, some of those other conditions will likely limit extractions in those smaller water bodies such that 20 cubic meters per year actually isn't feasible. So some of those other conditions that would likely limit that extraction ability are basically not extracting pits, so not extracting too far below the water level. Extractions not occurring in flowing water, not occurring in habitats of threatened species, drinking water protection zones, not disturbing roosting, nesting birds, that type of thing.
I don't think you're allowed, just a quick comment, can you just check on that one? I don't think you're allowed to take it below the water level, it has to be above main flow.
It,
Or
so that
the
it's
flow of the
flowing
water
water.
level.
You can't
You can't be in the wet.
You can't be wet, you can't be wet, you can't
Yeah.
take it as the wet. Yeah.
Thanks for that, yeah.
It's beyond
Okay,
13.516.
Got a pretty good round of questions about. Well, you'll go quite quickly, yeah.
I think there's a lot of nuance to this, and so I appreciate that the rule specifically currently does not talk about farming. Am I right there? And there is also, which I'm not so clear about in the new plan, the flood situation, which is distinct, that you're fixing something that's happened about structures. That's a completely different rule, isn't it?
Yes, there's a rule for clearing flood.
So this is one, and sorry, I am coming from a farming understanding that this is often used either for tracks or to safety, health and safety on a farm and things. At a scale of a farm that is substantial, 20 meters is nothing per year. The old rule was per 7 per person and could have been anyone, and I just don't understand it. The link to the purpose being local, I think, is important, and that is part of that location thing, because I don't want someone who wants to go and there is, I mean, the question, I think we need to give my concern is that we've stuck to something that's already in the plan because we understand it, but I don't know that, couldn't we nuance it more with its timescale and the purpose? I mean, is it really that hard to do? For a large farm with the tracks that need to be protected.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it comes back to Felicity's point that this is kind of an interim framework. We're only probably going to have this in place for quite a short time. We have nuanced it through the conditions a bit more than what we had, but yeah.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, we'll go away and have a think about it. But we are time constrained and information constrained. I think we can commit to seeing if there's another layer of nuancing we can add into this.
Yeah,
as an option.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a few things.
Yeah.
Can I just, I'm thinking we've got to move on, but I've got a question. But we need to keep going, but my question is probably not fair, but I'll ask it anyway. Has there been, have we had, under the current plan, we allowed to take 20 cubes per month, has there been any regulatory or processes around harm done to waterways due to the permitted gravel extraction?
So in terms of compliance action,
yeah,
I don't have that off the top of my head, and I don't know.
sorry.
There's 33 consented gravel takes at the moment, but I don't know that if we've had any compliance stuff, so I'd have to come back to you on that.
Just to add to that briefly, I think most of the impacts you'd see from this type of activity are cumulative and not necessarily acute. So it would be less likely that you'd see direct compliance action. The other thing is where we do have information on gravel short rivers, so one example would be the Pomahaka. The thinking around that is that significant gravel abstraction over time has potentially been a part of that. And so it gives you an indication of where effects might be occurring.
Thanks, Tom. I think we'll move into debate. So the idea is to end up giving a direction of travel ideas. So has anybody got comments? Kevin?
Yeah.
Gary? We've got Kevin, Gary, Brian, Michael.
Look, I think it is a combination of 2 and 3, but I would be putting that 20 at 100. You're taking it from 240. We're not actually saying, well, here's a patch that we've got an example now of the Pomahaka, but yet to be proven. So, and if my concern is still the time that we're going to take to get this code of when everyone else has got these codes in place. So if we ensure that process is as short as we possibly can, but done correctly, that will either change that 100 in a short time. I presume you'll need a plan change then to do that. So I'd be taking that 20 back up to 100, but still with a maximum of 20 cubic meters in any 1 month. 20 cubic meters in any 1 month, which allows someone to take a truck down there, fill up and go, which is practicality, and then limit it to half or less than half the amount that we've got 240 cubic meters at the moment. We'll work that down to 100, mainly because we don't know the size and scope that's what's happening, and we don't know the pressures. That's what I'd be thinking.
Thank you, Kevin. Hey, Gary.
Yeah, my feedback on this is that we are really entering into policy making that is just unworkable. It's going to be breached. It will be ignored. We are talking pittance type stuff on our major rivers, for the Matukatuk, for the Clutha, or whatever. 5 cubes a year, 20 a month is a pittance. So it gets ridiculous when it comes right down into small creeks and streams on farms. And I really agree with Kate around management in those situations. Farm plans will manage some of that. What we don't want is to be creating limitations for TAs that is going to cost ratepayers and how they manage their assets and put their assets at risk. There are multiple instances where volumes of gravel need to be moved at certain times in prep for what might happen into the future. So, this really is bordering on ridiculous policy. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Brian?
Cool. What the report says is that the limit in terms of, from a water quality and ecology perspective, is 20 cubes per year. And it's also been said that, the code of practice is being worked on. In the interim, we need to be conservative. We need to think of the waterway, prioritise the waterway. It needs to be a simple rule. To me, it's an amalgamation of what's proposed there for option 2 and option 3. And when I say option 2, I'm aware of, in combination with other conditions. So Gretchen's pointed out this is a small waterway, the morphology of the waterway. So a combination of options 2 and 3 is written. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Michael?
Yeah, I'm a bit uncomfortable, and I do need to say it, with the idea that we are trying to develop an interim framework, and that, as has been admitted by staff this morning, that we are time and information constrained in what we're doing at this point in time. I'm a bit of I have a similar sentiment to Gary, in the sense that if you don't know what the problem is, or you haven't actually got to the stage where you can do it, then why would you make policy to do so? I look at how far ahead particularly Canterbury is on this issue, and I don't know when we intend to have our gravel extraction policy or strategy or code done. I haven't got a time work on that. Perhaps somebody can tell me. But in the interim, I'm a great believer in increasing in the short term the amount of gravel that can be extracted, because at the moment it is too little. But good God, we do need to look at specific rivers and sites and develop gravel extraction plans for each of them. Somebody's mentioned the Pomahaka this morning, a completely different river than some of the rivers in my neck of the woods, and each will require a different strategy and plan. So I'm a bit of a delay fan at the moment until we get our gravel code or extraction code done, and we need that done as quick as possible.
Thank you, Michael. We have Elliot and Kate.
Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with option 2 and 3. Combined, I think this with most of the other things we're looking at, needs to be done on the science we have, and then when there are any gaps or uncertainties, we need to take a better safe than sorry approach to these risks that activities pose. So, yeah, clearly there's justification for moving it from that initial 5 meters cubed, but yeah, comfortable with 2 and 3 and taking a cautious approach.
Thank you, Elliot. Kate, and then
I'm not comfortable because I'm not sure what we're doing and I'm not sure the effect. Now, I think some of the gravel use is actually to mitigate other erosion risks and dust risks and health and safety issues of tracks. Tracks are really important access. And I've been up the Hunter Valley on the road there. If you don't have gravel for that sort of, it becomes a really problematic, not just for the farmer, but for people, the public using those roads. So this isn't tied to a purpose, and it should be tied to a purpose that is rational and sensible. I think it should be tied to a quantum per length of a stream compared to its width. And they're not particularly hard ratios to think about what would look sensible, and talking to some people who do use this. At the moment, what you're talking about is an extreme reduction on a large property per person, because that's what the other factor was, a per person. I think it was a ridiculous rule the way it was written, don't get me wrong. I thought we should have been slightly more creative and understood what the problem we were trying to fix should be. I don't think it should be carte blanche, just go and put gravel for recreational purpose necessarily. But with all respect, and we don't know how farm plans are going to be interpreted, I would have seen this as a farm tool that was used for animal health and erosion and other things, and could have been dealt with in a farm planning consent for fresh water component, because it does absolutely affect freshwater qualities and would be the better alternative way of doing it, or providing an alternative pathway that would get you into exactly what option 3 would probably end up being doing anyway.
okay, so we have Andrew, then Edward.
Thanks, Lloyd. A combination of option 2 and 3, but with the limit at a higher level, such as been mentioned by Kevin. I think it's important to think about this activity occurring not only for ecological reasons, and absolutely get that we need to be approaching this in a sustainable way in terms of managing a resource. But I've seen plenty of examples of where gravel such as this has been sitting in riverbeds and causing bottlenecks, want a better word, where the carbon footprint for carting gravel literally hundreds of kilometres from A to B. It's huge when this resource is sitting in a river. And just to confirm, I'm not suggesting compromising the environment. All I'm saying, we should actually have a lens across this from a resource perspective as well.
Thank you, Andrew. Edward?
I'll just take a principles approach, in-stream, riverbed approach. First principle is responsibility around that. I do think the existing plan in its permissiveness does create quite a tension in terms of change, and to try and on better knowledge, to bring in better management frameworks for our resources. I think options 2 and 3, I can understand that there's been science feedback that it could go to 20 cubic meters a year. So I think with a combination of those conditions that we've heard some of, I think in seasonality of it, so options 2 and 3.
Thank you, Edward. Any other comments? Tom?
Can I just ask one question relevant to this? And that is, when is the code of practice for gravel extraction timed to be passed by this council?
Thanks, Michael. Kevin, do you have a comment on that?
Yes, we will likely simply adopt the ECAN code of practice, so there's no real work required there. It's just a process issue in terms of adopting it. There's no technical input required.
Surely our rules are different.
Yep. Did you hear that, Michael?
Yes, I did. But does that mean that the Canterbury one, as I understand, is specifically tailored for individual rivers as well? Does that mean that we're going to do that here too?
It's mostly generic. It's a code of practice about how you go about the extraction activity. So it's quite operational. So therefore it makes it quite generic because it is acceptable best practice in that regard. There might be some parts that are customized to particular water bodies, but it's generically applicable to our view.
Thanks, Gavin. That probably opens up option 3, and that the code of practice may be something that we don't have to wait too long for. Where are we up to? Edward, anybody else? Up to me.
Look, I'm supportive of options 2 and 3 on the grounds that the water quality and ecological qualities are maintained. So yeah, I'm on option 2 and 3 as well.
Yeah, I'm with that too. I mean, I look forward to the longer term strategy with that site specific information, but in the meantime, there's options 2 and 3, and in the absence of further information, to be ecologically cautious, and let's say 20.
Thank you.
Same, comfortable, 2 and 3.
From my point of view, I'm probably, from my point of view, I think we probably, a lot of the gravel that comes, people take out of the waterways is often for environmental reasons, not farming reasons. It's not about commercial stuff. It's about, you know, helping the river continue on its course down the way. And 20 cubic meters, well, 5 cubic meters a year, it would be better just to say nothing. You know, because people are going to go and get it anyway. But, you know, 20 cubic meters per year is also not a lot of gravel for like, and so, but 20 cubic meters is only enough to say, yes, you can have some gravel. It's not about a commercial thing, because, you know, for 20 cubic meters, yes, you can dig a hole, put it that way. But I'm very much down the lines of option 3. Like, we need to have we can have an amount like the 20 cube a year. It was, you got to remember that's been up till now, has been 20 cube per month, and I don't know if there's been any major issues with that up until now. I haven't heard of any. I've never seen it in the media or anything where there's been a whole lot of gravel taken out that shouldn't have been. But so the 20 cubic meters is not a large number, but we do actually have to have exactly what's written here. We need to have a straightforward consenting pathway to be able to take more. So that way, so you can actually go there and actually have confidence that if you're going to apply for consent to get an amount for the benefit of the waterway, first for the benefit of the waterway, but it may be a co-benefit as well, that it is a straightforward consenting pathway. And the sooner we can get it, you know, the code of practice will get. This comes up quite a lot in our discussions, is to get things down to a catchment-based level. As soon as we can get things to catchment-based levels, then it becomes a whole lot easier. That you can have your set of permitted activities around each catchment and have it monitored that way. So I'm pretty much very much leaning also towards 2 and 3, with that, you know, understanding that it's a straightforward consenting pathway. So that's pretty much brought us to the end of the gravel. Can we
Sorry,
quick comment here?
we have been waiting, and I'm hoping that it's in this afternoon's CEO's report. Sitting alongside this is the global extraction consent that that's a totally separate measure, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just wanted confirmation of that.
Yes, yes. Different, yeah.
But I'd like to.
Okay, so I think for this one here, there's a wee bit of divergence of opinion. There's sort of like, I think there's a couple of schools. One is, you know, leave the gravel takes relatively high, relatively permissive. There's another one. I think there's a general consensus that you know, the 20 cube per year is probably a better target than the 5 cube per year. But you know, my gut feeling is there's probably a consensus that, you know, to keep that to hold the line, as you say, at that, you know, at a higher level, but then to move to try and work really good around option 3. Does to create that straightforward consenting pathway and a more nuanced catchment-based approach as soon as we can. Does that make sense?
Yes, and what I'm thinking, which we will probably need to have a think about, but off the top of my head, is a permitted activity with the 20 cubic metres, but then possibly a straightforward consent path where it's a controlled activity, so it's going to be granted, and the matters of control are limited to, perhaps it's for between 21 and some upper limit in terms of the volume. There's a space where it's a controlled activity, it's going to be granted. The council just puts controls on timing, location, that kind of thing. And then if you still aren't complying with that, then there's a discretionary activity pathway for the likes of a commercial, really large operation, or if there's wanting to operate in a really sensitive area or something like that. Sounds like what you might be looking for. It's difficult for a permitted activity to be site specific.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's awesome. So we're pretty much wrapping that. I think Michael, you have your hand up. Do you have a quick comment?
Thank you. Sorry, I just wanted. I'm sorry. I realised I asked the wrong question. I apologise, particularly to Gavin. I should have been talking about the gravel strategy, not gravel code. When do we expect the gravel strategy to be completed by, or in its draft form brought to us around the council table?
Yes, it's next financial year. I don't have an actual date at the moment, but it's a year 1 LTP activity.
Get that, Michael? Year 1 LTP.
Okay, so that means that this plan that we're setting on, Lloyd, does that mean that the interim will be until we get that strategy, and then what do we have to amend this or what?
Oh, I can't answer that.
Yeah, through the chair, we'd do a plan change, but Councillor Lords, you'll be aware we've already got some plan changes programs, so we would just roll it into one of those.
Okay.
Thank you. Have we got a reasonable steer there? Do we? Is everybody pretty happy that we've landed on 2 and 3?
Well,
Awesome.
I just take Gretchen's point that you don't want all 20 taken to one point, and I do think we can be more nuanced than suggesting that. And that's the problem, is there isn't that nuance. If you're not dealing with width and you're not dealing with length of the stream, then I think you're actually failing the values.
Conditions.
So they've taken note of that, so that would be included in the conditions of your permitted activity.
No,
They could have
it's
something
not a
along
permitted.
those lines.
Yeah, sorry.
We understand the feedback, and we will incorporate that as we do our next level of thinking.
Lloyd, can I just clarify? So it would be clear, if it's a controlled activity, it would be clear that the matters that would have to be addressed to be able to get a tick of approval for a controlled activity.
Yeah, the council can only consider specific things, and so you would list the specific things, so you would know that it would have a limited scope.
And you would be able to bring that information back to us.
Yes.
It's not an activity.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. So we're going to do one more, and then we're going to have a quick break, because I think the next one don't say that shouldn't be too bad. So the next one is around agrochemicals on next to waterways. So
yes. So the proposed plan, much like the water plan, has a permitted activity rule for discharging agrochemicals such as pesticides and herbicides, and vertebrate toxic agents, which are pesticides. The draft provisions are the proposal at the moment is that for discharges of agrochemicals to land, they're permitted if the substance is approved under HASNO and it's being used in accordance with that, and the New Zealand standard for agrochemicals, as long as it's not discharged within a drinking water protection zone or within 20 metres of a water body or a bore. Discharges of agrochemicals to water are permitted if they meet those same conditions, but not obviously the 20 metre setback doesn't apply if you're in the water, and after reasonable mixing, receiving water quality standards are met. Otherwise, the discharge requires consent as a discretionary activity. There was support in the feedback for improving the cumulative management of these types of discharges. So although they're often undertaken, in relatively small volumes, they're used very frequently in a lot of places. And so there can be cumulative impacts of agrochemical discharges. But there was a lot of opposition to setbacks, which was seen as being an obstacle for undertaking pest management and biosecurity work. Quite rightly, a lot of people pointed out that if you can't spray weeds in a riparian margin, then you are really preventing the effectiveness of those margins and being able to manage them. And there was some confusion about discharges to air. There was some commentary on aerial spraying, which is not something that's managed under this plan. So the suggested change we've got, option 1 is to maintain what's there, which I don't think is practical for those reasons we've talked about. Options 2 and 3, again, are probably, you could do a combination of these. Option 2 is both of those options would remove that 20-metre setback, so people could be undertaking pest management, and weed control particularly in riparian margins. Option 2 describes some types of controls that could be placed in those buffer zones where there's a risk of contaminant loss into the water, such as using spot spraying to prevent eradication of the whole margin, restricting the application to only pest species, or limiting the discharge volume. Some of those controls are a little bit difficult to implement, I guess, in terms of, a limit on discharge volume would be, how much you're using depends on how far you're going, right? So if you're trying to weed spray a 100-metre strip, you're going to use less than if you're spraying a 5-kilometre strip. So those can be a little bit difficult to work out. Option 3, 20-metre setback requirement, remove the setback requirement, but still retain the restriction on not discharging within a drinking water protection zone.
So we got questions. We got Elliot, Kate, Brian.
Just come back to me after questions.
Oh, okay. Kate.
When this has been decided, have we gone through this with other parts of our council, like people doing willow control?
Yes.
Because that's generally been done aerially. And what is the effect of option 2, for example, on our ability to deal with willow control, which is
Yeah, I think we engaged with I think it's environmental implementation team on that, and they were quite clear that there were specific techniques that they could use that could work within that.
And the
those
effect of
constraints.
those, using those techniques on cost and
Sorry?
efficiency, and the effects of those on cost and efficiency. I mean, I know that the OSC has worked exceedingly well with Apatari Way on aerial control of willow and the Taieri squirrel plants, which is highly encouraged and one of the key outcomes of MEP work there. Would they now be required in order to continue with that under this to get either a more expensive method or to go for consent?
Yeah, look, those discussions are still ongoing, but we are engaging with them, and because we need to actually define as well what those specific pest management controls are and what the tools are and the techniques. But that's an avenue that we're exploring with them. So
we can raise the specifics about.
So well, there is a process, a really important process here, and I'm sure it'll come out in the cost and benefit analysis of these. But if these rules are going up and coming to us without us understanding that internally, it's a difficult one.
I guess what I'd just say is there's been no significant adverse reaction from the teams that engage in that work, which I would expect to have if they thought the costs were significantly higher or the challenges were harder, but we can specifically ask that question. So we are working internally. We do have internal working groups across all of this.
And one of the suggestions that came from those types of groups, it might have been from Lynn's, was not having the 20-metre setback if you are if you are controlling pest species that are listed in the pest management plan. I don't know off the top of my head whether willows are. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't, because they have kind of dual. Okay, right. So, and maybe pest species is too narrow a focus, but there might be other exemptions where you would want to allow activities to occur within that margin.
I've got Brian, then Andrew.
Yeah, cool. I think, in relation to that one, it's more about the principle. As per our debate yesterday, have I got this right, that you can still spray within the 20 metre, but it has to be an aquatic top, okay spray?
Yes, but the feedback we've received on that is that few agrochemicals are approved for aquatic use and most common weed killers aren't.
So the ones that are approved won't kill your brome and they won't?
Well, I
No.
no, generally, yeah. The most effective weed control agents are not approved for aquatic use.
No, I
So,
realise
yeah.
that, but I'm just trying to get, do you really need a nuclear bomb or would a smaller one do?
It may affect your bush life too.
Okay, but you answered the question. Thank you.
I've got, Andrew then Clint.
Just popping back to the pest species, and if it was related to a pest plan, I just wondered if you used the word nuisance, may be broad enough to go and incorporate willows and whatever else that we are responsible for. I had a question with regards to option 2, bracketed only use spot spraying and also limit on discharge volume. So I assume spot spraying excludes any mechanical activity such as drones.
Yes, and I think that's well, it would depend how you've got the drone set up, whether it was to just blanket spray or whether it was a spot spraying mechanism. There are difficulties in what you don't want is to permit people to just spray and eradicate the entire riparian margin, but there's definitely the controls that you can place to control activities in that margin are quite difficult to describe and identify. So spot spraying, originally we did talk about only using non-mechanical options, and I think we moved to spot spraying because you could still use drones if they're not set up to just blanket spray. Yeah.
Can you quantify what you mean limit on discharge?
Yeah, so some councils have a maximum volume of agrochemicals that can be discharged over a particular area. So that would be another option to look at, which could take into account the size of the areas that you're looking at, just to ensure that you don't have, like a nuclear bomb in one area. You're using the least amount that's effective for the purpose, but that would require more advice, I think, with our pest management officers or biosecurity officers. Sorry.
So it would be linked to something like being connected to the recommended rate that has literally no impact, no greater than minor or whatever. Is that what you were thinking?
So some of the has no approvals do actually put kind of dosage limits, so we could look to those to kind of see whether whether it might actually already be covered in that side of it. But
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have Tim and then Garrett.
So at the moment, the draft framework has recommended 20 metre setback. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
So now I'm not quite sure how to phrase the rest of this question, but I know we're looking at forestry next week. But currently the forestry setback, we're saying 50 metres. Now I'm assuming that's going to come back. There's a lot of spraying that takes place with forestry, so I don't know where the forestry setback is going to be because we haven't talked about that yet. But within this sort of scope, because there is spraying that takes place with forestry operations, obviously. So how can we be informed here to make a good decision?
So they would be permitted to spray 20 metre, between the 50 metre and the 20 metre. If that 30 metre slot, they would be able to spray as a permitted activity, but they wouldn't be able to for the 20 metres between, to the water body. But like you've said, the setbacks are on the list for next week. And when one of the strong pieces of feedback we heard from the community was that there's a need for more consistency in the types of setbacks being used for different activities, so that you're not having 3 metres for this thing and 5 here and then 20 somewhere else.
Garrett.
Thank you. Did you talk to the contractors?
about this, because the specificity that we're getting to here with spot spraying versus, like, we're getting quite specific on technique. But anyone who's done hand gunning and gauze, and if it's taller than you, you're gunning up in the air. So, you know, we're getting into setting policy that technology and technique could override that, because the helicopter technique around spot spraying and or blanket spraying and how they turn nozzles on and off is getting quite technical. So I'm just, did the contractors give advice on where this should go?
We had talked to the biosecurity officers about the mechanisms that they use and what would be practical to talk about in this role in terms of the terminology and the different practices. But I appreciate what you're saying, that doesn't necessarily capture what might be coming, what technological developments there might be in the future, which is a risk.
See, what this rule could create is what people who have their own equipment may use versus how a contractor may operate. And I'm a little bit worried that we're going too far and will potentially create more of an issue than less of an issue.
Excellent. Thanks, Gary. Any other questions?
Sorry, even though I don't want to spray myself in the spot spraying, the time that you do it and the risks of doing it can be quite substantial. It depends on the water flows, the quantum of the water as well, like how big the river is, and that again isn't particularly nuanced in this blanket rule. I mean, if you're doing willows beside the Clutha, it may be a very, very different effect than doing it on a small tributary during a drought. Yeah, again, the second largest region with one of the highest diversities, and we've got one blanket rule that doesn't reflect that, and whether we can be looking at a FMU specific, but again, I'm going to ask it. I think I'm going to get hit down again. Farm plans being an option, because that is certainly something that's in farm environment plans already, and being an alternative pathway, because they are absolutely adamant about technique and ability to do that work and your skill in doing it. So, yeah.
There's certainly a lot of alignment between the types of activities that you would manage in a farm plan and the use of agrochemicals, because riparian margins, obviously you need weed control. The farm plan, though, wouldn't provide a pathway for organisations like LINZ or DOC or ORC. So there has to be a backstop in the plan.
Absolutely, but you could have this and have an alternative pathway.
Yes, you could, yeah, but you still need a framework in the plan for anything that's not covered by the freshwater farm plans.
Yes, but this, so you haven't offered up here as an alternative pathway the freshwater farm plans for this activity.
No, but next week we are going to be talking about freshwater farm plans and kind of looking across the full suite of possible.
Maybe I should
noted, but it can be noted there as well. You're right, Kate, it's not in there at the moment. I think we're hearing that we should explore it.
It wasn't included here because regardless of whether some activities are dealt with in a farm plan or not, there's still activities that are not, and we have to have something. So we're talking about the something. Maybe there should be a freshwater farm plan option for farmers, but what do we do about people who don't have?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It should be both.
Is there a, sorry, this sounds pedantic, but a definition of what spot spraying is? Because it could be quite big. And also, that's one question. The other one is quickly just trying to figure out the rationale for the 20-metre setback. Is it to do with avoiding spray drift? And if it was, could you control that by other means, like saying there will be no drift because you'll be doing it in these conditions, or you're using this type of nozzle or whatever, and you could have a smaller setback potentially. Yeah, so sorry, there are two questions.
Yeah, no, that's fine. There isn't a definition of spot spraying, but we have been talking to the biosecurity officers about what that might encompass in terms of the technical terms for the different methods that they use. So that would probably, if we were to go down that route, it would probably, I'm not sure if we'd stick with spot spraying or whether we'd specify the actual mechanisms, but then you lock them in, which is a risk as well. the 20-metre setback comes from some studies done on the effectiveness of vegetated margins for containing sediment. And so what we didn't want was the broad scale spraying of margins, because then you increase the risk of land use activities, or contaminants from land use activities having a much easier, quicker pathway into the water. So it was really to try and protect those margins. But I guess this is a risk balancing exercise. Is the risk that people are going to spray out their margins greater or less than the risk that you might unintentionally restrict good activities like weed control?
Thank you. We'll go into a quick debate around the table. That's all good. And Elliot would like to go first.
I think, you know, it makes sense again to combine 2 and 3 if we were to remove the 20-metre setback. But yeah, particularly want to look at what those additional controls would be. I think, you know, restricting it to just the pest species in the plan is probably too restrictive. We know there's, you know, a lot of other problem species, but things like limiting the volume of veg discharge makes perfect sense to me. And as Gretchen sort of alluded to, there might be some refining for the methodology that would be allowed in that buffer though. But yeah, I think in general combining that 2 and 3 makes sense to me.
Gretchen?
I don't think we should remove the 20 metres setback, but and I do think that spot spraying is good. Yeah, so I don't know, maybe that's a combo, but there's a reason why these chemicals are not approved for aquatic use. They bioaccumulate in the system. They have proven effects on a lot of the invertebrates, including freshwater crayfish and other sort of keystone species like that. And yeah, when exactly the answer to that last question of when you look at a site that has been sprayed, which does occur often where people target everything in the riparian zone, even when perhaps there's seedlings that are natives, and that's nice, but actually the rank grass and other things provide really important cover, which we've just heard as well, actually improves the quality of the water and provides habitat, etc. So yeah, that type of spraying isn't good. It's really up. Yeah.
Any other comments? Gary, Andrew, Brian.
I think we are stepping into 2 technical controls that will potentially just make the ability to do what we're trying to achieve too hard. Technology is going to advance. There's good stuff out there now. There is always a little bit of overspray, but when you go out to spray a specific issue or weed, then you tend to target that as best you possibly can. If there has to be a slight amount around the edge of it, then unfortunately that is the unfortunate outcome, but you minimise it, and the contractors do that very, very well. I don't support the 20-metre setback. I think that is just creating too big a buffer barrier, and I don't support the drinking water protection zone option 3. So option 2 would be where I'd be.
Thanks, Gary.
Without the spot spraying part.
Thanks, Gary. Andrew?
I'm probably similar. And just on spot spraying, I'm just trying to think of a scenario where there could be unintended consequences. And let's say you've got old man's bed in the no spray zone, or only be able to spot spray it 3 or 4 metres high. You've got no access to a drone. Biosecurity Act tells you, and our pest plan tells you that you need to, as a landowner, need to control your own weeds. So I'm thinking of that unintended consequences. So I would like to put my hand up for anything else, sort of option 2 at the moment. I'm not fully convinced that we may get ourselves tied up in knots.
Thank you. I've got Brian, then Kate, and then Tim.
Retain the 20 metres setback for environmental reasons. Sprays, they need to do more work in developing appropriate aquatic sprays.
Thanks, Brian. Kate?
Look, I think this is overreach without with best intent, but without understanding the consequences. We've got a very committed community groups at the moment looking at large scale riparian improvements. And this could be taking out one of their absolutely key tools immediately. It's been used really, really effectively and supported by government funding. It's about the scale and the use and the intensity, and I think you can definitely do some work on that. I look at Waihola as one of the best examples of fabulous end outcomes done over a number of years at a scale using helicopters. In the end, they actually did get a resource consent, but the idea of getting a resource consent for some of the stuff at scale is daunting to community groups. And I'm not sure that it's really is going to get us a better outcome either. I think you can do as much damage with people with backpacks, do with the best of intent, as clever, skilled, very sensible contractors doing it at scale. So yeah, I think it's it hasn't articulated the problem well enough and the risk and the options. And again, if you don't have that risk analysis there, which is really clearly set out, then I think you're going to get a very bad unintended consequence.
Thanks, Kate. Tim?
I feel quite conflicted here. The highest level of protection is obviously the 20 metre setback. But then I think we'd be looking at primary production coming up to 5 metres. And I think that the use of spot spraying and the best practice around managing weeds will be used within that 5 metres. So there's a bit of a conflict going on here with what I see. So in order to compromise, I think we'll probably be heading for option 2.
Thanks, Tim. Kevin?
Yeah, look, I'm option 2, but I've a real worry about only use spot spraying because I think technology will surpass that option. And I also believe that sprays, while it would be all good to have them completely aquatic tested and done, but I think that the right method and the right sprays that are selective on what they're killing will actually overcome that anyway. So, and then then the spot spraying would not be necessary. So, yeah. So I'm just thinking with it, especially we've taken away the 20, we've got a 5 metre setback there that we're trying to establish natives in, or whatever we're trying to establish, and we're 3 kilometres long, and we can put a drone in there with the right selective spray and job done. I would hate to think that spot spraying would restrict that sort of action. Yeah.
Thanks, Kevin. Edward?
Yeah, I'll probably lean toward retaining the 20 metre setback. Spot spraying, I'm not sure if that's the same as ground application. I think there's probably a place for ground application within the 20 metres. The difficulty with our chemicals is they're very dangerous, and EPA struggles to do their reassessments. There are potentials to get better chemicals that can be used in the aqua space, but they're a long way off. So spend a lot of time dealing with EPA over this stuff, and aerial application issues. So I'm tempted to go with option 2, whereby retain the 20 metre setback. And we have to avoid drinking water protection zones.
Thank you, Edward. Any other comments?
Yes, I mean, like Tim, I'm really conflicted on this. I think I hear what Gretchen and Brian are saying about the use of those chemicals and how important it is to keep those out of our waterways at all costs. Also, I don't want to go down the track of creating those, making it really difficult for people to do other work. If we were to go for the option 2 in restrictions and buffer zone, then we'd want to see very careful thought to what those restrictions are. So it's a bit inconclusive for me.
Oh, Lisa.
As a walker, I see a lot of chemicals used on riverbanks, just taking out everything. And maybe there are contractors that do it very sensitively on their farms, but certainly in other lands, it's not sensitively done at all times. So I think until we can see ways of doing it and seeing that people really understand the impact of these chemicals, which I don't believe people do, that we need to stick with our 20-metre setback and allow some spot spraying, I suppose, and things. And you've always got this huge problem that you're going to get all the weeds back, and how do we control? We don't seem to have very many other tools, but it might actually push people to start innovating other tools.
Exactly.
We have to have that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Alex, got a quick question.
Sorry, just a belated clarifying question. If you were to create for option 2, like one of the controls being it needs to be a pesticide, approved for aquatic use, that's the same as just sticking with option 1, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was just a question.
Same sort of question is just under pests in your up there it says pest species, but in your document that you gave us it says pest species identified in the regional pest management plan, but you've got that note that
Yes.
we might want to extend that.
Extend that, yeah.
Yeah.
I was just saying to Fleur that one thing, given that there's differing views, one thing that might be, that we can do, that might be a way of assisting with this is to frame up 2 options and include both in the draft that goes out for the next round of consultation, and then you will get some feedback because we will be engaging with a lot of statutory parties that undertake these types of activities, including DOC and the like. And you could use that to get some feedback.
Cool. No, it's good. I think it's good. We're a wee bit divided on this one, to be fair. I really worry about the unintended consequences, because you're going to have a 20-metre margin, and that means that you're basically putting a 20-metre margin for land cultivation if you can't pre-spray or do grass crop control or something like that within that 20-metre zone. And also spot spraying is pretty spot spraying. What is spot spraying, for crying out loud? It's only really just spraying. You just turn your thing off every now and then. But there's a difference between spot spraying and targeted application and ground application. Because like I've been involved in big planning projects, and if you've got fences that have been, if you've got areas that have been fenced off for 5-10 years, spot spraying, you've got to get if you're going to want the right period plant, you can't do it spot spraying. It's just not going to happen. So you got to do, so you got to be really careful about if you put in a rule, how what the ongoing effect is. So it's got to be. So I probably like what Edward said at the end of the day. It's more like a land-based, something around land-based application. Okay, I do. But having said that, I've got pretty close ties to a river, and I know that there's parts of our river that have struggled with healthy life in it, probably due to chemical issues. So there has to be some. Don't want to use that word, regulation. There has to be some practices that we have to implement to avoid that. So I'm quite honest with you, I'm a little bit. I've written down option 2, but not with the spot spraying. Not without the spot spraying, but just change the spot spraying to targeted application, because there's already a prohibited activity already behind the scenes. You can't put sprays that are not for aquatic weeds over into waterways. But that's like a national thing, I think, isn't it? Yeah. So this is like the next level stuff. So I'd probably just want to do it so that you can have it's about targeting those wooded weeds as opposed to becoming specific in how we target them, because that's my comments.
And I think as well, picking up Councillor Wilson's point about providing an alternative pathway to farm plans.
And that could be something you could say, this is how we're going to mitigate, how we're going to control it and mitigate the life of our waterways at the same time. Yes. We happy with that? Awesome. I think we'll go have a 10-minute break. We'll make it 5 minutes, so we're all back within 10. That's fine. So that's really quick. Okay, we'll reconvene. We're underway again. Apologies for Brian. We'll just carry on with where we're at. I think I actually haven't talked to Anita, but I think we can extend to 12:30. So the chair and the CEO are happy with that. So we'll run with that, eh? So we'll carry on to the next one. Strategic direction, resolving over allocation.
Yes.
That's what it looks like.
So there is strategic direction in the plan that applies to all activities. The NPS requires phasing out existing over allocation and avoiding future over allocation.
Sorry.
If you're coming in late, we'd quite like you to be quiet and go on. Sorry, Felicity.
No, that's fine. So it's based on a discussion with councillors and feedback that we had from councillors some time ago. There was some strategic principles preferred by councillors for when you're in a situation where there is over allocation and you're looking at actual resource use reduction. So in the case of water quantity, obviously you would look at efficiency and actual use first, but when you're getting down, when you've done those things and you're looking at actually having to claw back, how do you go about doing that? There were some preferences expressed by the council for preferring uses that directly benefit communities within Otago and those that provide the greatest economic return. It's not clear from the council paper that I've seen for that meeting whether that discussion was in the context of water quantity, because over allocation is a term that applies to water quality as well. So the feedback that we got from, we ran some scenario testing on the plan. So we got the consents team to run some mock consent applications through the provisions to see whether there were any issues with what was in the draft plan. And some of the feedback that they provided us with was that they found the principles on direct benefits to communities and greatest economic return quite difficult to implement in a consent framework. It wasn't clear how you would weight direct local benefits with other benefits. For example, in the case of renewable energy generation, the benefits of that activity tend to be not just local, they're also regional and national in some cases. And how do you weight those benefits in with this principle? You might end up in a situation where you're preferring economic return over an activity that might have a lower return but be much better for the environment and much better for the community and sustainability in the long term. And there was some concerns that there'd be quite a high information requirement for consent applicants to demonstrate these benefits and where they fall in the community as well as the economic return. It's also quite difficult, not so much in water quantity, but when you're talking about water quality, where there's no common catchment expiry dates necessarily for these activities, and they might be permitted. It's quite difficult to prefer a particular use if you're only looking at one application, and how you go about applying those types of principles if you aren't looking at the full suite of activities. Sorry. So we've got three options here. The first is just to retain what's there, which will be very difficult to implement. And So option 2 is some revisions to ensure that there's more consistency with the higher order documents and refocus some of the principles at the moment so that they are not quite so absolute in terms of preferring particular uses. Maybe it's taking into consideration the benefits on local benefits and the economic return. The third option, but for both of those options, we would need more direction on how to weight different types of benefits and how to consider, what is a local benefit, and does the employment of 3 people outweigh benefits of energy generation that would be outside the region? What do you do in situations where there's staff employed who are local, but maybe the ownership of the company is not local? There's some complexities in there that we'd need a greater steer on in order to implement that principle. And the third option is to remove those 2 principles because the way that we are approaching resolving over allocation for water quantity and for water quality has moved on, I think, since then. And I'm not sure that it would be very difficult to have one set of principles that would be appropriate for both types of over allocation, because the methods that you're using are very different.
Sweet. Thanks, Felicity. So we got Brian, then Elliot.
Oh, a silly question, sorry. This prioritisation, local benefit and all this, is that during the process of getting rid of the over allocation, or is it where you land up?
It's on the process.
It's the process. So where you land up won't necessarily favour any particular use.
Well, it may do. It would be quite difficult, I think, with the principles at the moment, if you were going from an over-allocated catchment to, getting rid of that over-allocation, it would be quite difficult to put renewable electricity generation ahead of a farming operation, because farming operations tend to have more local benefits because they employ people.
So we are picking winners and losers here.
Yes.
Whereas previously, one of the strategic directions for this council is not to pick winners and losers.
Yes, and I think, and that's why I say I wonder whether this has been superseded through the discussions that have happened since the original principles were set, because this certainly does pick particular winners, I guess, or uses in terms of being where their benefits fall and the economic return that they have.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Elliot. Elliot's good. Alan.
Yeah, thank you. How does this section and this discussion relate to the next one, which is about what's it called? Policy direction over phasing out over. It seemed to me they're very closely connected. Would be good to have some exploration of that relationship.
Yes. So although we have tended not to provide recommendations, the relationship between these 2 items is really, if you pick option 3, then you can do the option that's set out in the next item. If there is a desire to stick with the original principles about local benefits and economic return, then we would need to revisit the approach that's currently proposed for water quantity over allocation.
Would it be worthwhile giving an example or explaining it, how it works in the water quantity sphere? So basically, we've come up with a framework. We're kind of diving into the next thing, but we've come up with a framework where we've got a 2-staged approach. That means 2 stages of consenting, where there is over allocation. There will be a first short-term stage. People get a short-term consent, and during that period, they can come up with a framework of how the community is going to address over allocation. In the second stage, they'll get a new longer-term consent, but that consent requires them to actually phase out over allocation. That relies on the ability and the willingness of communities to kind of come up with their own solutions. If we don't have that, we need to have a backstop, and that backstop would be a reduction, a pro rata reduction. If we do that, we need to make sure that that is aligned with the strategic direction. And so any prioritization of specific uses in the strategic directions, we also need to take that into account, or we need to give effect to that when we come up with those proportional reductions. So the two need to kind of work together in a way. And so whatever you decide here needs to be reflected in the policy for water quantity specifically.
Yes,
Everyone.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess, well, it is sort of related. Options 2 and 3 here note to changes to ensure consistency with higher order documents. So the current proposal, what are the problems or what are the inconsistencies with those?
So the main issue arises from the NPS for renewable electricity generation, because its focus is on the regional and national benefits of those activities and recognising that in decision making. But if there is a principle in this plan to prioritise local benefits, then that's where the inconsistency arises. And economic return as well, because there are other activities more profitable than energy generation.
Thanks. John, have any other questions? Oh, Kate, Michael?
I've always found this difficult because we put irrigation as one use and hydroelectricity as another use, but they're often totally interrelated in the schemes. If you look at Many Hera Care, if you look at the Many Toto irrigation, you can't really pull them apart particularly easily. And we don't seem to ever acknowledge that, and that's just causing us no end of problems, because if you're going to say we're going to reduce irrigation, then if you're not going to get the hydroelectricity, but that's a priority, you could get it. It occurs to me that that's just an allocation issue we're not even acknowledging, and therefore we're not fixing.
Okay, statement.
Well, no, it shouldn't we be? I mean, you're acknowledging that it is. The prime example is actually Many Toto irrigation. It's got, you've got two power stations on that scheme. One doesn't work over summer because the water is diverted for irrigation. The system doesn't work if it's not. I presume you know all this stuff. Am I talking?
No,
we're just thinking about how to do it.
It's really challenging when there's a national level direction that prioritises one over the other.
Yeah.
So that's the situation that we're in, is we have national direction that says, you know, provide for REG.
Okay, so using that as an example, I'm not sure you'd still have a scheme that would be functional if you said that you're going to put all of that water through the Petaroa scheme in summer, because that's a higher priority. You're absolutely going, I'm not quite sure that Prospero, or whatever it's now called, would be asking you to do that, but it's a really difficult.
I think what we were talking about in terms of the proportional reductions would be that would be considered, that system would be one considered together. What you would struggle to do under the principles at the moment is determine what are the local benefits of those activities, and it might be that some of them have greater, like the hydro might have fewer local benefits to the irrigation because of the employment numbers or because of the flow on economic impact within the region, and that would be where the difficulty arises for those multi-uses of water.
Thanks, Kate.
The other thing as well is that a lot of those situations where you have a combination of hydro and irrigation are actually the bespoke catchments. So
Yes.
there's the option there to kind of actually come up with something that considers the interactions between the two. It's only when you apply the blunt kind of pro rata reduction or proportionate reduction that it becomes problematic.
And the other part of that question is obviously, because I'm going to be consistent, the use in the future, and I don't think the communities are generally there except for maybe Kaiburn, the potential for doing some of this as water allocation committees as part of the farm plan as opposed to being a resource consent matter. Has that been considered?
We can't manage water quantity just through freshwater farm plans. So, I mean, they can be part of them, but in terms of providing an alternative pathway, there isn't an option to do that.
The other challenge that I'm just thinking through is a farm plan is property specific and an allocation committee is not. So I don't know that you'd be able to bring in a collective resource.
As a
through
membership of
that
that,
process.
if your farm plan
So the
continued to be.
farm plan could say you should be a member of, but I don't think it would actually control the resource.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michael?
I mean, I see your problem because you're trying to anticipate the future and God knows what that's going to be like. So let's just return to basic principles here. Our plan's got to be subordinate to national planning documents and higher order documents, etc. anyhow, doesn't it? So are you trying to shoehorn in something that acknowledges these new renewable energy guidelines from Wellington?
No,
What?
we're working off the existing NPS for renewable electricity generation, which came out in 2011.
Right, so it goes that far. Okay. So in this particular case, the conflict would occur, would it not? Well, you tell me. There's three conflicts, aren't there? There's irrigation, the use of irrigation water, the use of that water for renewable energy generation purposes, and then there's environmental purposes and ecological purposes. I'm assuming that you're trying to create a rule that allows the consents officer to balance those. Is that correct? With every consent that they have?
At the moment, these principles would require a consent officer to try and decide which activity deserves the water more in terms of their benefits, and that's the difficult thing.
But a number of these renewable energy generation, they're in the future, yeah? I mean, there's not many that are existing at the moment, but they may come into the future, which I guess is why those policies or programs have been enacted from Wellington. What happens when you've allocated the water under this plan and then along comes somebody with a renewable energy project?
Yes.
From these, what would happen then?
Well, and that's another one of the difficulties, is that if you're only looking at the uses you have now, then you might end up making decisions that are not delivering on the principles in the longer term, because there are some other activities in the future that might deliver more local benefits or a greater economic return, but you can only decide on what you have available at the moment.
So does this mean that in practical terms, you're trying to come up with a plan that means that you're likely to have shorter term consents, particularly for irrigation, because you're anticipating that there may be renewable energy projects in the future?
No, not at all, no.
Okay, so you're saying that that won't have any effect at all? If you give a 15-year consent for, say, the Manuherikia, then you give a 15-year consent on today, not on what might happen tomorrow.
That's correct, yep.
Yep, that's cool. That's what, yep, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Kevin?
I'm just really struggling about this allocation set, in that if I go build a dam and take water out of the river and divert it and go through the dam, I actually don't use that water other than take a wee bit of electricity out of it, because all the water comes back. So when we look at we are using that water, and I suppose I want to be able to use so much water at any one time, but that, providing that water is going back into the system before other users have used it, we actually haven't allocated that water anyway.
Yeah, so non-consumptive takes aren't part of the take limit, so they wouldn't be.
So, but you keep talking about, you keep talking about over allocation with hydro. It doesn't actually use any water. I mean, it uses the
Some
water.
of them do.
Some of them,
Yeah.
it depends on the
Yeah.
scheme, yeah, and but
Waitaki
also what,
doesn't.
yeah.
Like, I don't know, Potty's a really good example. of
Yeah.
one that does.
And then
Mana
there's
Pori
also
takes
that-
all of the water and uses it.
Oh, yeah, but
Discharges
drops
it
it
to
down
the
the other way.
coast.
Yeah, cool, right, that's my, I'm one good clean ones up the Waitaki. so
And it
that's-
might be like, we're sort of talking about water quantity, but these principles are most difficult to apply for water quality.
Yeah.
Because if you're talking about economic return, you might have an activity that is, it has a really high contaminant loss, but it has a higher economic return than a situation where the productivity or the economic return is lowered slightly in order to deliver better environmental outcomes. And I don't think that you would want to end up in that situation where it's just the return per hectare that's making your decisions. And it also might you might end up with some really unintended consequences, like water bottling is, an activity that would have a lot of local benefits in terms of employment, questionable benefits in terms of the actual company, making the money. But yeah, how would you balance that against an activity, other activities that a sheep and beef farm, you're getting into quite a tricky scenario, I think, when you're trying to apply these to land use activities.
Yeah, so by picking option 3, where does that impede current activities that are already happening at the moment? So for instance, Menehira, we've got a dam, we've got electricity, then we've got irrigation coming out, providing that we go for the right allocation limit, or in any scheme really, providing we've done that based on actual use. I hear you say you're going on to actual use, and then you're going to proportion out what's happening. So you've done that. Where are the pitfalls for not using our strategic way at the start?
Well,
to the people?
you probably wouldn't be able to do proportionate reductions across the catchment. You'd have to pick out the activities that have the greatest local benefits and the greatest economic return, and probably make them reduce either less or not at all. Whereas those that aren't earning as much or aren't benefiting the local community as much would have to reduce a lot more. So the impacts on your community would be a lot more lumpy.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, just before you go on, I wonder if it would be useful to explain how so this is the current draft, is what I've just put up on the screen. Under option 3, what would that now look like?
So 1 would stay
As is.
as is. 2 and 3 would go, and we would rely on the next item, which is about water quantity over allocation. So there'd be an approach for water quantity over allocation. And then separately, we are addressing water quality in a more topic specific way. So we've got different approaches to reducing contaminant loss from different activities. That is probably a more sensible approach than trying to use those 2 principles there.
So sorry, is this what's existing? This is. what
Well,
you're
that's in the
saying?
draft, sorry.
That's in the
just to be
draft.
That's the
clear,
draft.
not-
No,
So that's in the hierarchy of obligations
Mm.
to mana or to wai, so that would be the economic.
Not, so you have
not-
the first priority is the water, second priority is human health, which is your drinking water and stuff, and then everything else. So you'd be, if you're looking at reducing actual water take, you'd be looking at the other things before drinking water and the water.
we've got Edward and then Kate.
Yeah, I think Felicity may have explained it just then. I sort of struggled with these ESP principles, and I didn't quite understand them, to be honest, and because of the conflict with the NPSFN. Presume it was principles arrived at before I was on the ESP. That's all I could probably do.
No.
No, it was up there.
Well, you were on the committee, whether you were there on the day,
It's from June.
Yeah.
So it's a while ago now.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Any good, Kate?
I think the principles are the principles, and you need to sit with them. It's regulated. I do have a huge concern with this sitting alongside a transfer policy. I've made that very clear in the past. I don't know where you're at that. I don't know that you actually understand my concerns particularly well. But if you've got a transfer policy, you will get exactly what you've just talked about as an unintended consequence, Felicity, because people will forward do this and transfer. So if you are concerned about those high use, high loss potentially being the issue, then you should be very concerned about your transfer ability during this process.
So that's, yeah, do you want to start the debate?
Oh, no, sorry, the question is the transfers rule still in there? Are you still allowing transfers? I've asked that question at the previous meeting.
We are still allowing, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So you're providing a pathway to do exactly what you've just said you don't want. Doesn't make sense to me.
You know, confusion reigns. Right, Alan first.
Just to try and reduce my own confusion. So on that previous one here, thank you, that one there. So that's what's in the existing draft. If we were to go with option 3, would that second back paragraph basically say reduce actual resource based on the hierarchy of principles in Te Mana o Te Wai?
Yes.
Only bullet point 1 would stay in.
Yes.
But it won't be a bullet point.
Yeah.
That's very drafting.
Yeah. Hierarchy in Te Mana o Te Wai is what will determine how we make those decisions.
But it wouldn't be, that would be the principle that would apply to all activities, but you might have additional guidance for the likes of your bespoke catchments where there's different approaches being taken under that principle. Yeah.
Okay, Brian?
Yeah, cool. While the, principles of local use and greater economic return were well intentioned, I agree they're completely fraught. Ultimately you could end up with a valley just full of the high, you're going to, with the higher economic, and I don't need to say what that potentially could be. You might talk about local, and then you actually find out that actually a person said they're local, they've been here 2 minutes, or it's actually owned by somebody in Auckland. They're absolutely fraught. We need to just go back to, as I said, I was saying at a cup of tea, a good rule is a simple rule. And so option 3, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Well, I've got Tim, then Andrew.
So I know that you guys aren't wanting to make recommendations, but you've told us that option 1 is difficult to implement. And it seems that you're hinting that option 3 is where you would like to land. Is that true? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Andrew?
Just a question, Felicity, you mentioned before about non-consumptive use of water. Are you able to give me an example of non-consumptive use of water? Based on our current rules.
So there's a definition of non-consumptive. I think it's in the, might actually be in the water metering regulations, but basically what it says is the water needs to be returned at or near the place where it's been taken and almost at the same time. Those are not the exact words, but that's what they amount to. So there's parameters around it. An example of a scheme that probably wouldn't meet that definition would be, I think, the Roaring Meg, where it's actually piped for quite a long distance, or the Teviot as well. In other cases, it's just going through a turbine. It would be easier to kind of meet that criterion.
Thank you.
Awesome. So we'll go into a bit of a debate, get a bit of feel of where everybody's sitting. Does anybody like? Oh, Brian's already set his off. So I've written your name down and ticked it already, Brian. Yeah. Does anybody else want to have any more input? Oh, we're going to debate now. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Option 3 makes so much sense. I don't know. It seems very convoluted to try and do these prioritizations on anything other than a case-by-case basis, and so it makes sense just to refer to principles that we're working under with the MPSs.
Thanks, Elliot. Anybody else like to say anything? I think that's pretty much the feeling of the room, to be fair. Basically, I think, number three, option 3 is pretty clear cut. We think that it has to be done based on a hierarchy that we're using across the whole plan,
I continue to say, not if you've got a transfer system.
apart from the transfer system.
But I think,
We
I'm not sure that people understand it.
might just take a wee note about transfer stuff, and we might be able to fix some stuff up. Yeah, that.
But if you go with option 3, Mr. Chair, the transfer system is just simply part of it.
I would have thought so, yeah. Probably it'd be the best one for the transfer one.
Yeah,
Just
so
take
the
away
transfer is
moving
only an
one
option
for-
issue if you go to options 1 and 2, so we've actually addressed it.
Yep, that's all good. We've come to pretty much a pretty conclusive decision there, so I think we can probably move on now to the next one, which is phasing out over allocation.
It's basically building on from the previous discussion. I think I explained to you, and we're kind of short on time, I explained to you how the framework kind of works. So unless there's any questions around it, I might skip to the next slide. So we basically presented that two-staged approach to the community. And yeah, in general, there's a support for that phased approach and for that framework. There's some differing views around what are appropriate transition timeframes. So when do you shift from stage 1 to stage 2? We're actually doing a little bit more analysis on expiry dates for consent, so we can better or have a more robust knowledge to determine those catchment expiry dates. One of the things that came up though is when you give the community the responsibility to kind of come up, or you ask them to come up with a solution that fits a local circumstance, ORC should be taking on either a facilitator role or a leading role. Shouldn't leave it up to the community. It's not fair to ask a neighbor, or actually it's not fair for a community to determine who within that community is gonna have to give up water and who will keep it. So that's feedback that we received. They also said that success will depend on clear goals and policy direction, which is something we've got to do in our plan, and take into account good information on the impacts of water taking and also on water use, and not just look at the water metering data, but be able to interpret it. So that's the feedback that we've got. Thinking about that feedback, we actually don't think that there is a need to do a change to the draft provisions. But bearing in mind, we need to be consistent with the overarching directions. But we did want to bring it to your attention that there is that voice in the community that would expect ORC to be active, I guess, in the implementation period and to kind of be involved in some of those community processes to find local solutions to over allocation. It's not something that we can write in the plan because it will be different in every single situation. And like I said, it's more something that we want to flag as something that needs to be picked up at the implementation phase or discussion around that.
Thanks, Tom. Questions?
So if I've got a consent that expires the date that this becomes active, and you chop my take down because of, so we've changed the levels of allocation. The other 3 people on the scheme, and theirs expires in 15 years' time, they would stay on that current limit for 15 to the consent expires.
It's a little bit more nuanced than that. So when the plan becomes operative and you're in a catchment that is over allocated, your consent comes up for renewal, you'll get a new consent that bridges you or that gets you to a certain date. in the future, so it gives you a little bit of time. You would only give up water at that point that you haven't been using or that you've been using inefficiently. The actual clawbacks on what you need or what you've been using will come at a later phase.
Yeah, so. Right, so if I, yeah, so you're going to take me back to my actual use based on a theory, and I think we've used that sort of a calculation on some schemes already. So that type of function will be done, and then it would be only after everyone's been through that process, if we were still allocated, over allocated, that would then change.
We'll try to the best of our ability to align the expiry dates for consents that come in for their first consent. There will be some reviews needed as well, because some have actually 35-year consents that go beyond the vision timeframe. So for those ones, we might have to do a review process.
And there'll be an option of all the users on the river to actually bring all the consents at once and realign the whole lot in one hit.
That would actually be ideal.
As a group.
Yeah, that's, I think, the intent behind it all. Yeah.
We need to have that done, so yeah.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay.
You use that word again, Tom, that I've still not quite grasped its meaning, and I'm going to be dumb enough to ask again what efficiency means. And I'm in the context that I've been and looked at what I thought was an inefficient system since we last talked about it up at Charlie McNally's, who was a submitter in the Maniatia meeting. And I was actually really impressed how efficient his irrigation system was. So, and so just understanding what the factors are that you consider makes efficiency work. Is it efficient for the environment, or efficient for the farm, or efficient for technology?
It is efficiency in light of primarily at the latter, technology, like efficient use, efficient application of water, and efficient conveyance of water. The assumption is that if you're using the water efficiently, it will have a good, it will be an environmental benefit as well, because if you use too much water on your land, you increase the risk of runoff and you put more demand on the water source as well. So I think the two are actually linked: environmental benefits and efficient use or technical efficiency.
So can I just give you this scenario? He's on a steep property where he uses races and overstalls, but only does it 5 times a year. So on average, in any one part of his farm, he has invested 700,000 into 2 pivots, which means that he has to drive them all the time and uses the water. Yes, more effective, but not necessarily more efficient for his farm. And it's just that there's a conundrum there that when it's similar to a setback, where you do a setback, you force intensification, which is exactly this thing that you're not trying to do. Sometimes you're driving for technological use drives you to an inefficiency, because you're potentially, and that's that quandary. And I'm just wondering if is that something that can be considered?
So can I just say that the plan's designed to pick up kind of 90% of what happens in one framework, and then the consenting pathway picks up those nuances, so that all of these applications will need a consent, and that nuance in terms of what we might not always define as technical or operational efficiency, but is actually efficient, is considered and consented.
And that is the absolute benefit of our consent process, is that those nuances and property specific things can be assessed and then looked at within that consent process.
Yeah, I just,
I think we get a wee bit off the, I think what was really the background is to around your efficiency stuff, isn't it? What Kate said is like basically that you can't just broad brush efficiency. It needs to be done farm to farm, which is exactly what the answer was, that under the consenting process, the efficiency can be looked at on a farm to farm basis.
So when you've got people losing the potential of losing water that we've just had described in the previous answer, and we're looking at over allocation, then people will start using water foolishly. And that's what I just don't want to be doing with this rule framework, is driving people to something that may not be actually what we intend. And so it is an allocation issue.
So, that's all good. I do have a question as well, and I think it's already answered, but I've written down here. This is just for me, I've written down, I do not understand is the development of a strategy with the community or / consent holders problematic. But I think that's part of the system within the overall system. Tom, you touched on it where, you know, when you said it would be really good if the community come to you and all wanted to do their stuff at once. Is that, so what you're really saying is that we got, you know, the feedback, the ORC to lead, and there's a bit of stuff around the transitioning time, but does that mean that we would encourage the community feedback or encourage the community to help solve the issues, be it the irrigation community or whatever?
Yeah, I believe
so.
so.
We wouldn't lead the community stuff. We would.
Sorry?
It would just be part of the.
Well, yeah, I think it depends, you know, like there's a spectrum where we can position ourselves. It could be as a facilitator or maybe as an educator, you know. There's risks, pros and cons to kind of taking on a leadership role as well. So we need to be mindful of that, I think.
Yeah, I understand that, yeah. Okay, we got any other comments around this one? We've had, well, good. So we pretty much come to a consensus that where nobody's generally against the as it's put there.
Yeah, just one question on the spoke ones. So there still are a few catchments where we have gone with our best estimate of those figures as opposed to full science on them and to get figures into the plan. So what's the time frame about having that before you start taking these actions? What is the time frame of those ones that we have with our best figure in to get them aligned up with when we have to make the actions under consent?
Yeah, probably the best person to talk to that specific timeframes is Tom, but I think on the whole there is a.
It's still online.
Is he?
Yeah.
I think there is a general understanding among staff that we need to give people time to actually develop those solutions. So these the goalposts in terms of allocation need to be well known before people have to, you know, submit consent applications.
Gary?
That probably doesn't answer me. Actually, no, it's probably actually when you're going to set the goalposts, though.
Yeah, so
That's I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just not 100% clear on the question. Do you want to repeat that for me, Kevin?
Oh yeah, Tom. So we've got some. You put your best figure into a catchment or onto a river that might not necessarily be the. So we've had to get a figure in there, a bespoke figure in there, a modelled figure in there, but that may not necessarily be the final scientific figure. So, of those catchments, when will we have the completed scientific work to ensure that that figure is right?
I think for the bespoke catchments, we have got a number that's very close to what might be your final scientific figure, and for minimum flows at least. For allocation, there are indications within those scientific reports around what an appropriate allocation regime might look like. So I think there's a good steer there. And now it's probably a matter of just taking that and completing the process in terms of dealing with allocation, and that's as Tom's outlined through, initial that phased approach.
Yeah, cool. So yeah. What you're saying to me, which I'm glad you're saying, is that you're pretty comfortable with where you've struck things at the moment, but a bit more time will just make sure that figure is more solid, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we're only going to get better information with time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Gary, you still got a question?
Yeah, I do have a question. Thanks. So I'm working on my first question will be, I'm working on the assumption. My question here is, it's going to be Manuherikia exclusive. because Menehirakia is a bespoke catchment. So is what we're discussing here overarching for the Menehirakia or not?
The approach applies to the Manaharakia as well. Yeah.
Okay, so my question then will be is the relevant paper to this, or a relevant paper to this, the one we have here that's the 31 over allocated catchments memo that we've got in front of me here. Is that relevant to what we're discussing now?
Yeah. Tom, can you?
Tom,
Yes, it will be for those 31 catchments, Gary.
Okay, cool. So my question then is purely relevant to that paper, because in that paper, there is an appendix A and it shows for each of those 31 catchments, a modelled 7-day mouth, and then it shows a default allocation limit. So that default allocation limit for each of those catchments, is that what we are saying to each of those catchments we are proposing would be your new allocation rate?
So as that's defined within that paper, that is simply the tool we've used to determine whether a catchment has a high level of allocation or not. The next step, which Tom will be able to talk to, is how that number gets used to inform allocation limits. So, if you think about an example like the Wainakarua River, we have a highly allocated catchment there that's we've used the same assessment process as that 31 catchments paper to determine that catchment is highly allocated, and then we've undertaken a bespoke assessment to determine what an appropriate long-term allocation and minimum flow regime might look like. And it's not exactly the same number, because we've used sort of more advanced ecological techniques to come up with a number there. And so it'd be the same. We're proposing a similar approach for dealing with the 31 catchments that are there as well. We haven't been able to undertake, just due to resources and timing and all of that sort of thing, we haven't been able to undertake those assessments on those 31 catchments. The reason for that is obviously resourcing, but it's also we've prioritised those ones a bit lower because they do contain 1 or 2 or 3 consents, not a significant number as those other catchments that we've looked at do.
Okay, thanks. So if I take some examples from that appendix, which I guess is what the people have submitted on and what will be notified if this advances forward. So say we take Camp Creek and we've got a modelled 7-day mouth of 360 litres a second. We are proposing an allocation limit of 72 litres a second for that creek, which is a substantially smaller number than the modelled 7-day mouth. So it's not, the allocation there has not been reflective of what is available over and above mouth. It's a percentage below mouth, quite a small percentage. So I guess if that's the case, because it would appear so, because that's what the table is here, that's the detail we're working to. If that is the case, my question is, well, how substantial is that to those existing consents? Like, what are we saying to those people and what they will currently have consented and either reporting current use to, because they'll be measuring and providing that? How substantial is that change?
Yeah. Those catchments, those 31 catchments, they will need closer scrutiny and see whether those allocation limits are actually appropriate. In some case, those investigations will show that we actually are going to stick with the number that we consulted on, but there might be somewhere the actual where the science work points towards a different recommended limit.
Can I jump in there? Sorry, it's Jackie. Could I just jump in?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think as Tom's just alluded to, that those default allocation limits, for the reasons you're just discussing, probably aren't appropriate in a lot of cases. So what we're looking at is setting bespoke limits before the consents in those catchments come up for renewal, with some sort of backstop in the plan in the interim, which is possibly more likely to be based on something like the current consented allocation, just to cap it and have a limit in there. But by the time the consents come in for renewal, we'll have a bespoke limit that will not necessarily be that default, because looking at those default limits, they are extremely harsh in places, and that default method isn't necessarily appropriate for those catchments.
So what we've got here actually is going to change. We probably shouldn't have that here. Is that what we're saying?
The memo that I've got that I'm looking at, my understanding was the default allocation limits were in there, I guess, as a comparative tool just to show what it would look like rather than a suggested limit. But I could check that. But
No, that's
certainly,
correct. That's
yeah.
correct, Jackie. And so the intent of that memo is just to highlight what that those 31 catchments get considered as highly allocated catchments because they don't fit within that threshold at the current point, but that we've and the intent is that we've got further work to do to refine what bespoke limits might look like for those catchments.
We get more than.
I'm really struggling to not say what I'm probably going to say now, but we are preparing detail. Is it clear in there for those people who would have access to this at some point, if they haven't already, that those numbers are going to change? Because I would imagine they would be very concerned to see those numbers now.
The key numbers will be in the plan, and with information within the plan. This is just a science report that provides the paper you're looking at is just a science report that provides contextual information for planning and implementation, and so that comes later on. But so those numbers aren't definitive in any way. They just provide that information to be able to start working through the planning process.
Relevant to that. So the figure you're using for the default allocation limit is 20% of the modelled 7-day MELF. And so
yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, cool. And so is that where you is that where you believe that's got to be at?
No, so
No.
this table is showing if you did apply that default, this is what the default allocation limit would be, and that's not right for these catchments. So there's now more work to do to determine what the allocation limit should be. That's what I'm understanding.
Yeah. And
yeah, that's correct. And if I talk back through the process really quickly, we started out with a huge number of catchments within the region. We worked to refine them down to a level where we could give good information for the most important catchments, and so those are our bespoke catchments, and we've gone into quite a lot of detail for each of those, and we've used the 20% of 7-day MELF as a cutoff to be able to define which catchments fall into your highly allocated bracket and require a decent amount of work, and which catchments fall into a status that is not highly allocated and therefore can have limits that are around that 20% of MELF, or that are at that 20% of MELF figure. Now we did that as a starting point, and I think you end up with 200 and something catchments within Otago that fall into that lowly allocated figure and get a default limit. And those default limits wouldn't apply or shouldn't apply to all of those highly allocated catchments within the region. So we've done bespoke assessments now for our most significant catchments that fall into that highly allocated bracket, and that we need to continue doing assessments for the smaller catchments with fewer consents to be able to get through to an endpoint. And we always work through this process with a course tool at the start in terms of modelled MELFs and all of that sort of thing, and intended to get where we've got conflict between water use and environmental outcomes to be able to do more detailed. We've always intended to do more detailed work later on. For some catchments that's done. For these 31, that's not yet done, but what we're saying is that we can do that work in time for their reconsenting dates.
Awesome. That was pretty well explained. Yeah.
But then, does that mean that those people for 30th June, what are they submitting on, given that that explanation is very good that this is going to change. So I'm relieved at that these aren't going to be the numbers. But is that going to change prior to the 30th of June, or should they be submitting on that to protect themselves here? So these numbers will appear in the plan, because this is a science report that's been prepared for us.
No, they won't appear in the plan.
One of the options that we're contemplating is to apply a Manaharakia kind of approach, wherein while we're waiting for the science to be completed, while we set a take limit that better reflects consented takes.
We take that offline,
Yeah.
Gary, just to
Yeah.
talk through that process,
Yeah.
just to give you some clarity.
We might come back, yeah, we'll come back next week.
That's good.
We'll come back next week and just round that out, I think, be useful.
Awesome. Thanks, Anita. Ryan, are you happy now? You're good now, Elliot?
Yeah, I was just wondering, in those bespoke catchments that we're looking at when we're looking at the over allocation, are we looking at historic use or just stuff in the reference period? Because I know there was some concerns around light paper consents around that, like, you know, people acting in bad faith to use water.
Process of triangulation, you kind of look at historic use, but you overlay also other information on top of that, like how much they need given a certain use and how much they're irrigating as well.
So we are trying to figure that out when we look at it.
That's all going to be done, yeah, through the consenting process.
Okay, so I think we're getting pretty much to a close on this one. I think pretty much, Gary's got some concerns around the reporting of that middle group. But we can get that cleared up, but other than that, we're pretty much happy with options as suggested. So that's really good.
I'll just, so we recognising that, we're not being ambitious with our program. We are going to extend next Wednesday to a full day. We've spoken to Kate, sorry, another commitment with RTC,
So does
and
Alexa,
Alexa, sorry. We will endeavour to look at whether there's any further time available, just how we structure it, because the level of discussion has been really good. I don't think it could have gone any quicker. And we've got some big topics still to get through, so we'll have a look at the program and where we can fit some extra time in.
And just from, thanks, Richard, just from the chair, I'd just like to thank you all very much for everybody partaking, as that's the number one rule, that everybody has their chance to have their say. And the second thing is for everybody, allowing everybody else to have their say and listening to everybody's points of view. So I think that's been it's been a pretty good workshop. We've got some consensus opinions, and we just need to keep working through. Because at the end of the day, as I said right at the very beginning, this is when we get our say in the plan as at today. So, and it's really good to get the feedback, and having good considered feedback is awesome as well. Okay, and so I think I'll just close it from we'll just close it, and we'll just get able to close it off for us.
Thank you. Unuhia, Tara, te uru tapu nui, te māma, te wātea, te tanaka, te tina, me te wairoa, i te ara takata, oi a rā e rungu i whakairiaki kei runga, tūturu whakamaua tina, haumi e hui e. Not sure if I've given you that.
No, you haven't actually, but I wouldn't mind it. It's on my total website, I think.
So what are you thinking for next Wednesday?